It's my pleasure to welcome you to this event and to open today's program. So, welcome to Mississippi State University, to those that are visitors to campus, as we discuss this important topic today in terms of artificial intelligence. I'd like to make a special welcome and thank you to our guests from Italy. Pacific Antonianum group, we're very pleased to have you here. A number of years ago, there was a decision made to expand our global footprint at Mississippi State University. So we had several strategic locations, and Italy being one of those locations. We looked at several locations in Italy, but because of our relationships with FAO and World Food Program, it was decided that Rome was the location that we would choose there. We're very proud that Antonianum is our academic partner. So we went through a long process of looking for properties and partners and that kind of thing, but we're very excited about this future that we have together. Over a number of years, we've had lots of visits to Rome to learn more about Antonianum, their academic programs, facilities that we have there, as well as the ones that we are renovating there. We're very happy to have them here this week to learn more about us, our academic programs, and how we can partner together. At the center of this partnership are shared interests in areas where our communities can learn from one another and contribute together. And one of those areas is data science and artificial intelligence. So these are fields that are demanding both technical excellence, consideration of ethics, governance, and human impact. Data centers are popping up everywhere. We have a new one on our North Farm out there near the high-performance computing. There's lots of them popping up in Mississippi. You see lots of investment in that arena. Earlier, actually just a few weeks ago, there was a conference in Rome regarding data science and artificial intelligence that Mimo Parisi and Jonathan Barlow both participated in. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to introduce today's topics and to introduce our distinguished panelists. So, Jonathan, looking forward to the program and hearing all of the comments.
Greetings to our many guests. We're so glad you're here today. To all the students, appreciate you being here as well, faculty as well. My name is Jonathan Barlow. I have the privilege to be here as your moderator. I'm the Associate Director in the Data Science Program here at Mississippi State University. Thank you to Dan Reynolds and the staff of the International Institute, especially Macy Smith and Hannah Bell, for their hard work on the logistics for the conference. And for Dr. Parisi and his being kind of the convivial glue between the United States and Italy. It's great to have those relationships and friendships. Thank you to our friends and gifts from Pontificia Università Antonianum for suggesting this conference and its theme, and for inviting our honored keynote speaker. Greetings also to our guests from Computational and the Center for Integral Ecology of the Mediterranean. This is the second conference inspired by this joint project between MSU and Antonianum. It's called the Observatory for Integral Intelligence. It's an initiative organized to inspire reflection upon the ethical implications of artificial intelligence. The title of this conference, The New Poverty, Complexity, Ethics, and Artificial Intelligence, evokes phrases from the document Antiqua et Nova, Note on the Relationship Between Artificial Intelligence and Human Intelligence, published in 2025 by two departments of the Roman Curia. The document speaks from the intellectual context of something called integral ecology that you'll hear more about today. It's a perspective that contemplates the possibility that along with great positive potential, AI may present challenges to the common good. Just as differential material wealth affects access to political and social influence, the document warns that AI could be used to, quote, perpetuate marginalization and discrimination, create new forms of poverty, widen the digital divide, and worsen existing social inequalities, unquote. The great complexity of current AI demands increasingly large data sets, computational power, and storage that in turn relies upon resources such as energy, land, and water. As an allocation of resources, this raises questions of sustainability, it raises legal challenges and understanding how to assign accountability, and AI's power to shape narratives raises epistemological questions. That's, for students, that's questions related to how we know what we know, relating to trust in factual or evaluative claims, and this particularly impacts universities as places where tomorrow's human leaders are learning to interpret this new world. This morning, we'll hear from 5 learned speakers who will reflect on issues related to the conference theme. There will be time for questions to the speakers at the end at our roundtable discussion later in the program. They will also be able to ask each other questions as well. And now our keynote speaker, Michael Anthony Perry. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Michael Anthony Perry. Dr. Perry is currently Minister General Emeritus, Order of Friars Minor, having served from 2009 to 2013 as the Vicar General of the Order of Friars Minor from 2009 to 2013. From 2013 to 2021, he served as the Grand Chancellor of the Pontificia Universitae Antonianum. Originally from Indiana, his life of service, learning, and scholarship began in the novitiate of the Province of the Sacred Heart of the Franciscan Order. He earned an MA and Master of Divinity from the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, Illinois, after which he received ordination and became a full member of the Franciscan Order. Dr. Perry worked in candidate formation and with the Office of Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation, an international ministry of the Franciscans. During his missionary work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, he completed a PhD in religious anthropology from the University of Birmingham and was elected as a provincial minister prior to his selection as Vicar General, the 3rd American to serve in that position. Dr. Perry's public leadership is suffused with the concept of integral ecology, a concept that many of us may be reflecting upon for the first time today. A few years ago, Dr. Perry employed this concept in honor of Pope Francis, saying, quote, "Rare in today's world are the credible prophetic voices which remind us that we are not gods. We are dependent and interdependent creatures called to respect and care for one another and for all of creation," unquote. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Anthony Perry.
It's often said if they clap for you at the beginning, at least there's hope, maybe at the end as well. Let me begin. Make sure I get these buttons. I'm still a troglodyte when it comes to technology in some ways. Let me make sure I get this correct. Yeah. Let me begin the discussion today, AI and our common home, with a caution, one that I believe frames everything that I will say today. Henry Kissinger once wrote, "The greatest danger posed by AI would be for us to declare too early or too completely that we understand it." That statement is not simply a caution about technology, it is a warning about us. Because of what it reveals in this, we are living through a transformation whose depths exceed our understanding. We are participants in a moment of profound transition, and yet we do not fully grasp the forces that have set in motion or the direction in which they may be carrying us. And perhaps most unsettling of all, we do not know yet who we may become in this process, Let's pause for a moment. I want to thank the organizers. I think it's a tremendous idea. The themes are amazing to bring these different ideas together. And so I want to thank Mississippi State University, the Data Center in particular, and also the Antonianum. I've had a long history with the Antonianum, so I'm very pleased to be here, and also with the work of the engagement of the Justice and Peace Network in the Mediterranean. So thanks to you for inviting me, considering me to be able to speak today. New poverty, complexity, ethics, artificial intelligence, and integral ecology. What becomes very clear at the beginning is that these are not separate conversations. They're deeply entangled. The more closely we examine each of them, the more we begin to see that they form a single interwoven reality, one that resists simplification and exposes the limits of our current ways of thinking, We are, in many respects, at the beginning. So how do we proceed in such a moment? There are two temptations, and yesterday I had a conversation with a couple of you here talking about these temptations. The first is the temptation to fear, the impulse to withdraw, to slow everything down, to treat uncertainty as a threat. The second danger is overconfidence, the belief that we already understand enough to move forward without caution, without reflection. And I think this is something clearly in the minds of the organizers of this conference today. I've encountered colleagues at our small university, 3,300 students, and nothing to compare with yours here, 24,000, whatever that number is, who could be placed on one of several different categories. Those who fear, or worse yet, who choose simply to check out and not commit to learn anything, to study, to learn to engage, to become an active partner in giving shape to the future. On the other extreme, as I mentioned, there are those who are absolutely convinced that the AI revolution will usher in the holy grail, the general artificial intelligence, making it possible to solve nearly all human challenges while acting autonomously of human agency. The AI utopia, I think, is what it's called. But should we recognize that neither of these will serve us well? What we need instead is a way of thinking capable of carefully considering and holding together complexity without reducing reality prematurely, a way of asking better questions, especially when we do not have many answers. I believe that the concept of integral ecology, that I'll explain what that means, I believe that it offers some means for us to move forward, a path. It's not a technique. It's not a policy. It's a way of seeing, a way of understanding, of analyzing, reflecting, and engaging as fundamentally relational, interconnected, morally significant, and for 85% of the population on this planet, spiritually significant and essential. Because it calls into the question, who are we with, and what are we destined to be, who are we destined to become? Perhaps it would be helpful if we began by a working definition of artificial intelligence, and I've drawn this from IBM and NASA. So someone told me yesterday they worked at NASA or they're involved with NASA. Very simply, AI is a variety of systems designed for tasks that are usually human-like: perception, learning, communication, decision-making. They improve with experience. They're capable of achieving things requiring different degrees of autonomy. I'd like you to keep that word autonomy in mind because I think that's at the core of what's our discussion. But even if we define it, we're immediately drawn into several deeper questions, existential questions. Are the silicon machines we are creating destined to become more like us, or are we destined to become more like them? Several movies come to mind. I don't know if you recall the movie I, Robot, where robots become sentient to the point that they begin to write their own rules and rules for humanity. Or another one, I Am Mother. It's the story of a big lie in artificial intelligence who convinced a girl that she was the last type of her species, Homo sapien, and she could not go outside because she was locked up because everything would kill her if she went outside. And it goes on the story. In the end, she gets out, she meets other human beings who are being who escape from similar situations. Mother can show various emotions and convince the human daughter of certain beliefs that are not true. Are we entering a period of co-evolution in which the boundaries between human and machines become increasingly blurred? And I know that last future silicon-based machines, there are different projections. It seems like anybody can make up whatever they want in terms of what the future of AI will go. But one of them, and actually we read it in several different articles, and that's why it stuck to me, was projections between 2029 and 2040. It's possible that this human-level intelligence, sentient, could become a reality. Is this hype? Prophetic prediction? I'm not going to bet any money on either of those. If the lines become so blurred between human intelligence and artificial intelligence, what happens to our understanding of the human person? What happens to our sense of moral responsibility, our sense of community, our sense of solidarity, our sense of responsibility? At what point do we begin to attribute these to machines qualities that we have long believed to be uniquely human? Empathy, judgment, even love. And we know the stories of people who are falling in love with iBots, the things that don't exist. I mean, they exist only in spatial data. These questions are not theoretical. The AI revolution is rapidly unfolding around the globe, and even here in Mississippi and in neighboring states. So let's bring it home for just a moment. I'm glad somebody mentioned that at the beginning. AI infrastructures across most of the regions. I didn't include Georgia, Tennessee, the two on their catch basins for students coming here. You have three. You have Mississippi, Georgia, and Tennessee in that order. So for those from Georgia or Tennessee, I'm sorry, you weren't excluded purposely, just for the sake of time. But Mississippi, these large-scale data centers. Amazon in Canton, $10 billion investment. Compass Data Center, $10 billion in Lauderdale County. And then the huge one, the XAI, the $20 billion in South Haven. Has anyone visited any of these centers? Have you seen them from outside, maybe? Well, at least one, okay. They now consume extraordinary amounts of water. The largest ones, 5 million gallons per day per center. That's enough for 50,000 people living in a city of 50,000 per day. They require vast tracts of land, up to somewhere between 300 and 1,000 acres. And some of the largest ones are 1 million square feet. I can't even imagine what that is. I mean, I don't think I've ever been into 1 million. They strain electric grids, causing blackouts and increasing energy costs for normal citizens. They contribute to pollution, the aquifers, the air. The health of people living in proximity increasingly is being challenged. Incidents of heart disease, respiratory illnesses, psychological illnesses related to increased and constant noise. And while they promise to generate revenues, they create relatively few jobs in the end. New forms of poverty. But does this even begin to tell the whole story? Because the infrastructure of AI extends far beyond what we see or what we study here in the United States. I lived for 10 years in the Democratic Republic of Congo, 6 of those years in a mining town of the precious rare earth metals. It reaches to these mining regions in Africa, in Asia, other parts of the world, where rare earth minerals are extracted, often under conditions marked by massive land degradation and deforestation, severe water contamination, air pollution, radioactive exposure, loss of biodiversity, child labor and modern slavery, community displacement and land theft, government corruption, conflict and violence, gender abuse, and the list goes on. If you want to read something about the history of this to understand a better context, a guy named Paul Collier out of Oxford wrote several books. 2007, he wrote a book on, the titles are there, Paradox of Plenty, and then 2010, The Plunder of the Planet. I think they will kind of help situate some of the negative effects of an unreflected and an uncontrolled expansion of the resources for AI. What we are witnessing is not new. It's just a continuation in a certain sense of the patterns that were established for extraction industry from the time of the Industrial Revolution. Concentration of wealth, displacement of vulnerable communities. Those are just kind of an outline of the vast system that AI depends upon. Data centers, energy grids, water systems, and then the global extraction chains that are involved. Only now are these patterns embedded within the digital economy beginning to appear on the surface. This leads to a critical thought. The AI revolution is not only generating wealth, it is also generating new forms of poverty. Not only material poverty, but something else we might call systematic impoverishment. I'd like to make a distinction between poverty and impoverishment. Poverty is a category of a state, of a situation a person finds themselves in, or communities find themselves in. Impoverishment talks about a process. It's systemic. It says there's causes of what. And so if we address the causes, we might be able then to change the noun. And that, I think, is something we need to focus on a little bit more. It's interesting, in the Middle Ages, for Franciscans who are here, the few of us are here, and anyone else who might have read, some of the discussions around, there were arguments over the question of poverty. And this had to do with the spiritual understanding, but in fact, they were looking at new forms of poverty during their time. new forms of the asymmetrical power relations. So what was behind it was they were trying to look at these great debates were really about looking at causation and why were people continuously being introduced into and held in situations of poverty. So this question of systematic impoverishment, this question of poverty, it involves a loss of agency, a weakening of community, a narrowing of the imagination, a concentration of power in the hands of a few, marginalization. We encounter data poverty, where certain populations are excluded from representation. We see the homogenization of knowledge and culture. We see increasing dependence on systems. I get behind on my slides here. We see increasing dependence on systems that are opaque and unaccountable, the poverty of truth. The question perhaps is not simply whether AI improves efficiency, the question is whether it redistributes vulnerability. It is precisely at this point that integral ecology, this understanding, becomes essential. Integral ecology begins with a fundamental insight. Everything is connected. So if anyone who's studied complexity, you should feel at home with integral ecology. The idea emerged in ecological sciences in 1958 in the United States as a recognition that organisms cannot be understood apart from their environments. It's developed far beyond that into a comprehensive framework for understanding the relationship between human beings, society, technology, and the natural world. Integral ecology challenges fragmentation. It insists that we cannot understand technology apart from economics, or economics apart from culture, or culture apart from ecology, or ecology apart from, and the list goes on. Everything is embedded within a network of relationships. Here enters complexity science. And for those who are experts in this, I'm not. But obviously, complexity science focuses on structure and behavioral dynamics of interacting parts, species, environment, emphasizing non-linearity and emergence. Integral ecology expands this to include human, cultural, ethical, spiritual, political, and the question of daily life issues. This vision is articulated most powerfully already in the work of an American historian of culture, a guy named Thomas Berry, who created a center in Queens. It's still there, Queens, New York. He passed a few years ago. He was a Catholic priest, and he was a self-declared geologian, a student of Earth's history. Berry describes the universe not as a collection of objects, but as a community of subjects. This is a profound shift. It moves us away from seeing the world as something to be used and towards seeing it as something to which we belong. Human beings, in Berry's view, are the self-reflective dimension of the earth. We are part of the universe that has become conscious of itself. And with that consciousness comes responsibility. Berry speaks about the old story, mechanistic, static, humans at the center, and Earth's resources are to be exploited to the service of human needs and wants. Talk about the age of the Anthropocene, if you will. It's something that's in more current time. He goes on to talk about a new story, the story of new cosmology. It's based on evolution, science. The universe is seen as a sacred reality, as a developing communion of beings, equizoic. But in between, and that's where he would suggest we are, we're in this liminal stage now between two stories. We've lost our connection, no longer able to weave a new functional cosmology because the old cosmology no longer works the way it once did. And maybe even then, did it even work so well? And the new cosmology, we're struggling even to give form to what that might look like. He comes up with a theory, this notion of a great story. He says we need a great story, and that great story will lead us to, it will bring us together, it will help us focus on what really needs to be said, this humanity and transition, a mutually enhancing human-earth relationship. He did not include this notion of triadic relationship. That's something which I've added, given the nature of the topic today, the importance or the role of AI. So human, environmental, and silicon machine. Berry did not ask the question, but I think we have to have the courage to ask this. Are we living in an age of triadic relationship? I think the question is yes, or the answer is yes. Other questions emerge out of this great work, if you will, this direction in which we're going. Do these technologies deepen our participation in the community life, or do they distance us from it? Do they foster communion, balance, harmony, flourishing, or do they redistribute vulnerability, fragmentation? Do they foster justice, dignity, and connection, or do they reinforce patterns of extraction, inequality, alienation? A second important thinker for the development within the thinking of Pope Francis and the place of integral ecology that I really am focused on today was a person called Leonardo Boff. Leonardo is 86 years old. He was at the Antonianum last year and participated in a conference on justice and peace. He's a Brazilian eco-theologian. He deepens the insight of integral ecology where he brings together two ideas, cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Writing in 1995 in a co-published paper, Ecology and Poverty, Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor. What is this cry of the earth? It's the groan of the planet under systematic assault through the destruction of ecosystems, the Amazon, Congo, climate change, pollution in all forms, a planet screaming because its vital life systems are being assaulted by humanity. I would recommend, particularly students, go to, it's 2016. You can find it on YouTube. I forget the name of the guy, but it's called 3 Seconds. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend that short documentary, 3 seconds. It's 4 minutes long, but it'll knock your socks off. And I think this is something, this question of the planet screaming. It's interesting. It wasn't Carl Sagan. It was the British quadriplegic and theorist, physical theorist. Hawking. Hawking said, if the trajectory we're on right now, we have less than 100 years before the Earth will find a way to begin to kick us off and to find a new species to work with. That's very interesting insight. So, cry of the earth. There's also the cry of the poor, the scream of marginalized human beings crying out for life, for dignity, for beauty, for inclusion, for their voice to be taken seriously. We're talking here about agency. Boff says these two crises are not two, they are one and the same. They're two sides of one coin. Environmental degradation and human suffering are inseparable. This has direct consequences or implications for AI. AI systems depend on ecological resources. They shape social structures. They redistribute power. And they carry the potential to redefine humanness, human identity. Boff goes on to talk about three principles contained within his understanding of integral ecology. The first is complexity and differentiation. The universe, he says, is dynamic, evolving, and becoming increasingly diverse. So to talk about removing the word diversity from our language at universities is counterintuitive and counterfactual to what's going on in the universe. And the universe will continue with this diversification, whether we call it or like to use it or not. This principle reminds us that technological tools also are not neutral. They interact with our institutions, our curriculum, our students' lives, and the way they create new complexities and opportunities. Second, Boff talks about interiority and subjectivity. Human beings possess inner depth, consciousness, moral awareness that shapes our relationships that cannot be reduced to data. Boff argues that it is subjectivity and interiority that differentiate human beings who possess consciousness, creativity, moral judgment, these from any other creature, including AI creatures. Recent developments in AI suggest that the line between carbon-based intelligence and machines, silicon-based intelligence is growing thinner rapidly. And we've learned that what we long thought of as distinctive, the distinctiveness of human interiority in thinking may not be as incapable of simulation as we once dreamed or hoped. A third element, a third aspect within this notion of integral ecology, a third dimension, is communication and interdependence. Everything exists in relationship. That underscores the fact that our use of AI is never isolated. It affects every aspect of society, even the broader ecological and digital systems. These principles do not give us easy answers. They are meant to help us orient our thinking. They shift the question from what can AI do to what does AI do to the relationship that sustains life. This vision proposed by Leonardo Boff and by Berry finds its most influential expression, I think, in a letter that Pope Francis wrote in 2015 to the world community. It's called an encyclical. It just means it's a teaching document. It's meant to have certain weight to it, a very serious a level of seriousness to it. Pope Francis in that document, on the eve of the Paris Accords, it's important to place that within context, articulates integral ecology as a framework for addressing the intertwined. See, I told you I get behind here a little bit. So, it's a framework for addressing intertwined crises of our times. A careful read of the writings of Pope Francis reveal that he has been deeply influenced by both Thomas Berry and Leonardo Boff. There's a third person, however, who influenced Pope Francis's thinking. A fellow, if you know anything about the Jesuits, it's a religious society or order within the Catholic Church, a French Jesuit paleontologist and philosopher, Teilhard de Chardin. De Chardin believed that the universe is evolving toward higher levels of complexity and consciousness, driven by a creative force and culminating in a final unifying moment, omega point. This process moves from material chaos to shared spheres of human thought. He calls that the noosphere, and ultimately toward ultimate communion with the Creator, God. De Chardin's influence can clearly be seen in Berry's thought, his theory of great story, new story, about the evolving universe, the community of subjects, and in Boff's theory of interconnectedness, integral ecology, the grounding of all creation in the sacred or the spiritual. In Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si', De Chardin's influence can be seen in the embrace of the concept integral ecology, the belief that all of creatures are moving together toward God. All creatures, not just humans, but all of creation is moving together toward God. And Pope Francis asks the risen Christ, who embraces all, that all of creation continues to evolve. It's caught in a movement of drawing all things back into the source of life, the Creator. Pope Francis expanded a salvation-centered theology to include a creation-centered theology, framing existential care, environmental care as an essential part of faith, not a side issue. It is a relational ecology. Pope Francis comes to, in a sense, recognize that much like the name that he took, St. Francis of Assisi, that all of existence is interrelated. It's interrelated. There's a moral, ethical, biological, a spiritual dimension that transects all of existence. We're invited in the encyclical to undertake a journey with Pope Francis and with all of humanity, one leading toward an entirely new and different way of seeing the world and living our lives, as if all creatures matter, as if all are connected intimately with my life, with your life, that we are one family on this earth, our common home, connected to the evolving story of a dynamic, emerging universe, cosmos. This connectedness, this unity of beings is more than a simple consequence of natural evolution. It's rooted in the heart for Francis, Pope Francis, and the earlier writers, in the mind of the Creator, of God. The journey of ecological conversion to which we are invited is moral, it's philosophical, it's political, it's spiritual. It touches every aspect of daily life, and it is urgent. It is so urgent that in 2023, October 4th, the Feast of St. Francis, Pope Francis issued another document called Laudate Deum. And he said, humanity, governments, you're not taking these issues seriously. There was a strong critique, and there was also a strong critique, quite clear, in particular leveled against the United States. What are some of the practical consequences of this interconnectedness of all of reality on AI revolution? This AI is not neutral. It's embedded. Its existence is dependent on natural resources, the earth. It is a force that is shaping human identity, individual and collective, affecting our relationship, our capacity for relationships. It is reshaping how power is distributed, shared or withheld within society. It draws upon natural resources. It shapes the future. It is shaping the future of human life. Because of this, AI must be evaluated not only by what it produces, but by what it consumes, what it requires, and the impact it is having on the whole. What it consumes, how the creation of an asymmetrical distribution of power and of wealth. I was going to say something about Pope Francis. It's interesting. Pope Francis didn't arrive at this idea of integral ecology, this understanding of all things being connected. It was a journey for him. Anyone who's read his story, there's a wonderful book called The Mind of Pope Francis, if you ever get a chance to read that. If you're going to have more contact with Italy, it might be worth reading just to understand where this understanding of this interconnectedness comes from. Pope Francis himself, his background, he was studied industrial chemistry and worked in a laboratory before he became a Jesuit. So he had already a notion and understanding of the method of scientific inquiry, a practical understanding of ecosystems, pollution, environmental change. So he was a systems thinker. He wasn't just a theologian. He was someone who understood that everything is composed or comprised in system. He participated in 2007 at a meeting in Brazil, and he was angry. Several times he got angry because he was focused from Argentina on the plight of the poor. He kept hearing from these church representatives from the region, the 9 countries of the Amazon, of the link between degradation of the environment and its impact on human beings leading to impoverishment. But he couldn't get it at the beginning. In fact, he got angry at several sessions and he just said to stop, it is enough. Particularly because he was put on the assignment on the writing team of the final paper. And on that writing team, he started to listen to stories of people. The church leaders brought in people who were mostly affected, deeply affected by the changes of climate. And as he began to hear their stories, he began to make the link that these were not separate things, they were deeply interconnected. And the third element, I think, so we've got his background as a training in chemistry. We've got his experience of listening to stories of people affected by climate change. And the third thing was 2013, when he became Pope, he dared to take the name of Francis, St. Francis. So I thought it was Francis Xavier, the Jesuit. When I heard it, I was in Rome and looking out over the Vatican from my office, and I said, oh, okay, I guess it shouldn't be unusual to take a Jesuit name. But he didn't. It was what I heard later was St. Francis of Assisi. And anybody who knows anything about St. Francis of Assisi, a couple little words before I move on. He was probably, I would consider him to be someone who possessed a mystical sensitivity towards the marginalized and the excluded, the impoverished of Assisi and beyond. He had an acute desire to promote peace and harmony among people, because one of his first words that came when he began to publicly preach was, may the Lord give you peace, may God give you peace. And so he probably carried, in some form or another, he carried that message to a meeting in 1219. It really wasn't a meeting. He went to Damietta, in Egypt, hoping to get to the Holy Land, and got to Syria probably, didn't make it to Jerusalem. But in any case, he met the Muslim leader of the war efforts there, the Crusades. And shortly after that, after their meeting, the Crusader leader, the leader of the Muslim troops, ended up feeding the Christian Crusaders who were starving outside of Damietta. So it's just interesting that this is the name that Pope Francis took. And what is it about St. Francis of Assisi that's particular here? Francis of Assisi, we have to be careful not to use the categories of today and apply them to yesterday. But Francis of Assisi had an understanding of the interconnectedness he came to that knowledge of the interconnectedness of all things. And in fact, he went a step further. It's not outside of other traditions, wisdom traditions of indigenous peoples around the world, but he spoke about creatures as brother and sister. They were relational. They were shared a sense of family together, but it also, he recognized a sense of agency in all of creation. In Laudato Si, this message, the Pope names 4 challenges. Excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself here. There. First, and I think this applies to AI equally, and I'm going to apply it to AI, AI is not just a technical matter, it's a social, ecological, philosophical, ethical, spiritual matter. All systems rely on vast infrastructures, as I've already said. Integral ecology provides us with a means for discovering the hidden links, connecting all things in a vast network of relationships. AI should be evaluated not only for what it does, what it uses and needs, but again, what future, what image of the future for humanity and for creation is it proposing? A second caution or challenge the Pope indicates in Laudato Si, he talks about the issue of fragmentation and reductionism. AI tends to reduce human behavior to data points, relationships to measurable outputs, and decision-making to algorithms. The danger here is not only technical, it is anthropological. It risks eroding our understanding of human dignity, moral depth, and cultural meaning. He talks about a third concern, a third area, if you will, a challenge, the issue of acceleration, what he calls rapidification. Technological change is occurring at such a speed that it outpaces our ability to reflect, to deliberate, and to choose to act wisely. AI amplifies the dynamic decisions that are made faster, system scales are faster, consequences spread throughout the system faster without fully being understood. Unintended consequences, if you will. Driven by a technocratic paradigm and digital technology, this acceleration can produce a whirlwind of needless buying and spending. It can turn people into consumers, encouraging them to enter a culture of waste, compulsive consumerism that prioritizes immediate gratification over sustainability or the common good. Excuse me, I'm still. And the fourth and last issue that Pope raises in Laudato Si is the question of the concentration of power. Power in terms of political power, in terms of influence, but also in terms of capital. Just a quick, yesterday I had a chance to take a few minutes. If you know, just in terms of the amounts of money that are going into AI technology today, NVIDIA, $4 trillion. I think that's its capital worth. Apple, $3.5 trillion. Alpha, Google, 3.6 million, and the list goes on. So the biggest concern, one of the biggest concerns Pope Francis articulates is the placing of profit in the strive for new technologies over the value and the dignity of people. So we arrive at a central insight. The challenge of AI is not only technological, it's moral, it's ecological, it's anthropological. That gets us to the 2025 document, Antiqua et Nova, and I'm going to just say a few words, and then I'll conclude. This document was issued by 2 important offices within the Vatican, dicasteries, the doctrine of faith, and the culture and education. I'm not going to go into all the significance of each of those offices, but they're very high level within the Vatican. But there's something else, anyone who understands the system in the Vatican, it does not, this note does not bear the signature of Pope Francis, which in some people can say, well, it's just a note, it's just a consideration. It certainly bears his thinking, but it also gives, if you're going to try a new idea and you're not quite sure which way it's going to go, don't have the highest person sign it, because it does 2 things. It sometimes can close down the space for dialogue instead of opening it up. It also withdraws what's called in institutional language plausible deniability. I think that's also keep in mind. In that document, there's a very positive view of technology and its potential, what it could offer to the world. But there's a strong cautionary note as well. The first point to note in Antiqua et Nova, it embraces and extends the logic of integral ecology into the domain of artificial intelligence. How does it do it? The second point, it expands the concept of integral ecology into what might be called techno-human ecology. So it becomes a 6th category. Pope Francis, in the chapter 4 of his book, his writing, his encyclical, describes what integral ecology is, and there he lists 5 ecologies united under the central unifying force or theme of integral ecology. This is a 6th. It acknowledges that AI systems are reshaping human relationships in education, employment, communication, and beyond. AI is also influencing social structures of power, producing other forms of poverty through inequality and lack of access, to name just a few of its manifestations. A third element emerges from the document, this note, Antiqua et Nova, offers a serious critique of the technocratic paradigm and its relationship to the AI revolution. It reminds us that technological revolution should not be guided principally by profit. It must be guided by ethics and a commitment to the common good. It calls for a wisdom approach that engages human participation. And it's interesting, in this year, the Pope, Leo, talked about the importance of wisdom in approaching technology, AI technology. He calls for 3 things. He said, besides courage, determination, and discernment, he says we need responsibility, we need cooperation, and we need education. I'll provide that reference later on what he was getting at. And the 4th element of Antiqua Nova, it offers a vision of human anthropology defined by a capacity for interiority, the profound spiritual core of the human person, a unique inner life that enables humans to transcend the material world. It also it can be described as a consciousness, a personal space where individuals reflect on their actions, engage with the spiritual, make moral decisions in their hearts. Other terms for this interiority include moral responsibility, emotional depth rooted in empathy, mercy, and love. As such, human beings not only choose, but in their hearts they're capable of deciding. The document also points to the fact that everything is relational, everything is embodied, everything must be held within a moral framework as we go forward. Human beings are not only capable of choosing, but deciding from within a shared depth of love, responsibility, and meaning. This raises several practical and pressing questions. What happens if machines begin to approximate these qualities, these specific human qualities? What happens when the distinction between human and artificial intelligence becomes increasingly difficult to discern? And here we must finally turn, I'd like to say just 2 words about the Franciscan tradition in closing. I'm sorry, I told you I get behind in these, so I'll close with this. We know that St. Francis, as I mentioned before, his world was a relational world. Everything belonged, it was in relationship to the other. It was a personal, relational universe. And this is the way he was able to shape a message, particularly in something called Canticle of the Creatures, written in 1225, 1226, written over a process of a year and a half, and took time for him to think this through. And it really wasn't written, it was sung into being, if you will. And he was relating the story of how we human beings are part of an ongoing, this long story, this great story of God unfolding in our world today. St. Francis offers us a vision of this reality, this unified reality that's urgently needed today. There's someone else who I think offers us some insights. That person is St. Bonaventure. Bonaventure was a big thinker, a big philosopher, a big theologian. He was also in charge of the Franciscans, or servant of the Franciscans, for a number of years. He offers a distinction I think is crucial, the distinction between science and wisdom. Science gives us knowledge, how things work. Wisdom asks a deeper question: what is their meaning? What is their purpose? How should they be ordered toward the good? AI represents an extraordinary expansion of scientific knowledge. But without wisdom, this knowledge becomes directionless, or worse, it becomes destructive. For Bonaventure, wisdom is what allows us to see the whole. It is what integrates knowledge into moral and spiritual vision. It's what enables us to act not only effectively, but rightly. And so as we stand at the threshold of the AI revolution, the questions before us is not simply whether we can advance technologically. We know we can. The question is whether we can do so wisely, whether we can orient technological development toward the flourishing of the entire human community or not. I want to conclude the word from Seneca. If one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable. Integral ecology names that port. It does not oppose innovation. It gives direction to it. It reminds us that progress detached from the flourishing of the whole is not progress. The future of AI is not only about machines, it's about each of us present here today. It's about who we are becoming. It's about whether we will choose to become more fully human in relationship with one another, in relationship with the earth community, in relationship with the source of all being, who, however we name the all-being God. Integral ecology, I think, provides a helpful hermeneutic, an instrument for holding these complexities together, bringing us together to work in collaboration, and providing tools to address the new forms of poverty. It provides us an opportunity to shape what the future will be. Thank you for your lengthy and kind attention.
Dr. Jonathan Arbel is William Alfred Rose Professor of Law and Director of the AI Legal Studies Initiative at the University of Alabama Law School. Professor Arbel earned his doctoral degree in law and economics from Harvard Law School. Before joining the University of Alabama Law faculty, Professor Arbel was a postdoctoral fellow in private law at Harvard Law School and a visiting assistant professor of law at Villanova University. Professor Arbel served as clerk at the Supreme Court of Israel and a research fellow at the Israeli Democracy Institute. In addition to being a productive legal scholar in the areas of commercial, consumer, and private law, Dr. Arbel has been a key leader in the scholarly discussion of AI and law in the United States through his AI Legal Studies Initiative and a series of stimulating articles considering how AI may be regulated, existential risk, how AI may be used to interpret laws or used to interpret human reasonableness, and most recently, the sticky question of how to count something like AI with no body and no clear means of individuation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jonathan Arbel.
What is the legal status of AI agents? And as we think about this question, what about human agents? So thank you for this introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It is a true pleasure. I'm excited to be here. As a student of artificial intelligence, it is incredibly important, and I find great inspiration in thinking about human wisdom as opposed to artificial intelligence. So I thank you all for the opportunity. So I'm going to try to keep it light legally and maybe ask some deeper questions about the law and the structure of AI agents. But I do want to start with an old English case. It comes to us from 130 years ago, where a pub owner, we have this fellow, his name is Humble, and he's not a very good business owner. He runs his pub, but he's not a very effective manager, so the pub gets bought out. But the pub still retains his name at the entrance, and we have here a fake illustration. This is not an actual image. But every visitor to the pub sees the name of the previous owner, Humble, on it. But there is a new owner, and the new owner knows who he has business with. He knows that Humble can do a lot of things. He can run the business well, but in terms of attending to clients, but not run the financial side. And so he tells him, he gives him very strict instructions. He says, well, Humble, listen, you are not allowed to buy anything for the business. I only give you the permission to buy beer and water, nothing else. Humble does not find it very persuasive. And he deals with suppliers, and one of them is a cigar seller. And he says to him, well, I want to buy cigars, and I want to buy them on credit. So the cigar seller assumes he's dealing with the owner of the business, provides cigars, and when it's time to collect, Humble is unwilling to pay, and the cigar seller goes to the business owner and say, well, you pay me. The owner says, well, I don't have to pay you because I've never given any permission to Humble, who's just my agent, to go and do business with you. If you have any claim, you can go after Humble and ask for money, but Humble is never going to pay you. So the case comes to the court, and the court has to decide what is the relationship between the owner of the business, what we might call today the principal, the manager of the business, the agent, and the creditor, the cigar seller. And the court decides that the business owner does indeed owe for the cigars. And it is hard to explain, and this decision has came under fire in various jurisdictions. In Canada, it has been overturned. Here, we don't follow it anymore. But in England, it's still powerful. Because people have asked, well, why do you hold the business owner responsible for the excess of the agent? The business owner has never authorized this transaction. Well, and the answer is, well, maybe it is something in the apparent authority of the agent. A person deals with a business and they assume that there is something behind that. But even that logic has not persuaded many commentators because there was no apparent authority. The humble's name was still on the business. But the court felt a need to protect the seller of the cigars, the creditor, from against the excess of the agent. So this case, which does not represent good law here in the United States, does show us some very basic questions about agency law and what we have to think about when we think about agency. We first, and just to make some very trivial observations, but they're going to be important as we think about AI, they show us that sometimes you want to have agents working on your behalf, like Humble, who can do things. Maybe they can do certain things better than us. For example, serving beer here. Maybe the owner is not very chatty, not very client-friendly, and that's a skill that Humble might have had. And second, Humble might have had a lot of time on his hands, and the business owner, who's a very busy person, did not have. So having an agent work for you serves deep functions. The agent has a comparative advantage. Maybe they have more time than you. And they also have some absolute advantage. There are certain things they can do better than you. Agency is a very powerful tool in the world, and people find it very useful to have agents all the time. At the same time, agents may overstep their authority. They may create liability for the principal, for the owner, in ways not anticipated or wanted by the principal. And when that happens, we have a conflict between the interests of the public, the people who interact with the business, and the principal, the owner, who has a very sensible claim to say, I've not authorized the transaction, why should I be liable to a third party? These are the tensions that we will think about. Agency, if we take sort of a big look at the field, is divided between the principal, the agent, and the third party. And the question is how to allocate authority and responsibility. And AI agents adds to this very basic framework 3 deep, hard questions. What is an agent? What is really, truly, when we think about people working on our behalf, other people, other humans, what constitutes an agent, and whether something that is non-human, can that become an agent? Who is an agent? How do you define who becomes an agent and who's not? And specifically, how to do all of that when we have AI agents. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what AI agents are. But first, I just want to give you a sense, a very sort of crash course into agency law on how we divide authority today. When you are dealing with a business, when you're dealing with a corporation, the corporation has many agents, employees, who work on the corporation's behalf. When they have actual authority, when the employer says to the Walmart employee, go sell things on our behalf, you're dealing with a Walmart employee, you're buying things from the corporation through an agent. The agent has actual authority, and every action they take goes back to the Walmart corporation. Sometimes agents act in ways that exceed their scope of authority, but they appear to be well within their authority. So you might not know that the Walmart salesperson is not authorized to sell you gift cards, for example, but you don't know that. You go to the store, you receive service. Because the agent has apparent authority, because the owner of the manager of Walmart could control their actions, we hold Walmart responsible even for certain actions that might be in excess of the agent's responsibility. And then there are some times when we will say, and this is important, that an agent acts on their own behalf. The principal is not responsible for the agent's action. And we see it sometimes, you will have a corporate employee goes out and commits some crime, not on behalf of the corporation, just people being human. And in cases of very clear access, we will not hold the principal of the corporation liable for the actions, the wanton actions of an agent. I'm seeding all of this discussion for questions about when do we want to hold AI agents liable and when do we want to hold the the people who use AI agents liable. I'll skip this. So how does the law even think about things that are not human? Can something that's not a human be an agent? The answer is yes. There are instances where we will say, for example, a corporation is not a human. The United States of America is not a person, but it can act in legally recognized ways and create legal liabilities and rights with others. You can buy from any corporation. You can sue a corporation. They can get sued. A different question is about the status of software. Can software ever be held responsible on its own as separate from the person who uses the software? And the answer here is no, there is no separate liability. The law generally treats software as an extension of the self, as an instrumentality. A tool we use, the way we use a hammer. And therefore, if our hammer harms another person, we are responsible for that. We are responsible for the tools. We see no distinction between the person and their extension, their tools. And for the most part, this is how the law views software. So we go, for example, we have software that there are cases where people will send bots to go online and scrape websites. And we say when those bots act in reckless ways, it's the responsibility of the person who created the software. If Microsoft Word creates harm to someone, then it might be the responsibility of Microsoft for all of those harms. And we see it as a fairly sort of intuitive way because we think, well, tools are just the extension of a person. There is no independent action. A hammer never goes out to the store and harms a person. It's always you who you might have left the hammer standing outside. So all of that would sort of counsel, and I think many people have taken that to mean, oh, we can just use the old frameworks and extend them to AI agents. Just say, well, an AI agent is just another software algorithm, tool, hammer. And so every time an agent does something, that goes back to the individual. But AI agents actually raise deep questions. Just sort of show of hands, just so I have a sense, has anyone here used an AI agent? Oh, wow, that's fantastic. Okay, so most of us, when we interact with AI today, we do it through a chat box. We go in and we ask a question, and then we get an answer, and this is where it ends. And that's it. The answer is good or bad. Maybe you want to ask a follow-up question. Maybe you want to try something the AI recommended to you and then see it doesn't work and go back with the follow-up questions. Agents are different. With an AI agent, you give a task to the AI. The AI comes up with a plan on how to accomplish the task. For example, book a table for me at this restaurant. Well, how do I do that? Well, I have to search the address of the restaurant to see if it has a website, try to go on the website, oh, the website doesn't work, come up with a different plan, and they iterate, they come up with a plan, and they execute the plan. And for many tasks, what we tell them to do and exactly how the agent goes out and accomplishes that, that's very sort of sensible. You know, you go and open table and you reserve a table. But there are certain tasks that are complex, and we are starting to assign AI agents with tasks that are very complex that we don't actually know how the AI agent will go out and accomplish them. And here's the critical point. AI agents are not standard tools. With a standard tool, you sort of know how it works and you employ it. It is determined how it will work. And sometimes tools act in unexpected ways, but those are unexpected ways of which we are aware. We can sometimes anticipate, oh, the saw might break, it might splinter. With AI agents, we don't actually know, just like the pub owner, exactly how they will accomplish all of their tasks, and sometimes they will act in ways that we did not anticipate or authorize. We've just learned yesterday that a new AI system can find ways to hack almost every known operating system, every browser you use. These AI systems know how to hack, and part of this analysis was this new very powerful system. One of the developers assigned it with a task and said, go do something for me. And they go out and they sit in the park on a bench and they have their lunch. They get an email. And they check their email and they see they get an email from the AI. And they think, well, how could the AI send me an email? I never connected it to an email box. Well, the AI figured out a way, the agent figured out a way how to connect to the internet, how to connect to, and realized that to accomplish the goal, it'll be advantageous to send out an email to the developer. This is truly unexpected and could be quite dangerous when the system decides that it has to hack its way into, like, I need to reach here at this conference on time, AI agent help me, and maybe it hacks the traffic lights on the way. It could be quite dangerous, and people might get harmed. What is my responsibility for the actions of an agent whose plans I do not fully understand? We might have the instinct of saying, well, you know, every time you use an agent, you have responsibility for every action he takes, no matter how unexpected. This may be an answer we'll have to give, but when we have dealt with humans, we have decided there is a line where sometimes we will say the human is no longer responsible because it was so difficult to anticipate what the agent will do. And if we will say you're responsible for whatever consequence of AI agents, that means that we will have to babysit all of our agents, and there will be very little point in making sure that all of our the pub owner, they always act in the exact ways that we have designated for them. So it's a brave new world where software, a tool, acts in ways that are sometimes even smarter than us in a very narrow sense, not wiser than us, but more intelligent in the sense of being able to accomplish specific tasks. It's hard for us to know. So what can we do about all of that? And with that, I conclude, right? Because I'm close to time? Yeah, all right. All right. So how might we deal with this problem? Oh, I should add one more, just because this is a deeply informed theological audience. There is another question we're facing with AI agents, which is, how do you draw the line around one agent and say, this is agent 1, this is agent 2, this is agent 3? When we have human agents, we have this very convenient line marking thing called the corpus, the body. We can say, well, this is one agent, this is another agent. With AI agents, we don't have this privilege because these are processes that they interact with the cloud, and the agent is what we call, probably, it's hard philosophically to even define an agent, but maybe the thing that continues between various calls back and forth to the cloud. With humans, we have memory, so we can say, I am the same person I was yesterday because I have the same memories and I have the same body. With an AI agent, we can have agents who share the same memory And then where is the boundary between one agent and another? And then, of course, we have some similar questions sometimes about humans, right? When I go to sleep, I don't always remember everything that happened to me during my sleep. Do I exist between being awake and being asleep? You have the privilege, we have the privilege of having the scriptures tell us, yes, we're the same person, same being, but people who don't follow these traditions do have like actual hard questions about whether this is the same person who persists. And now we have questions about AI agents. So we have questions of identity about agents that are new, truly new. And we have questions about tools that are truly autonomous. These are novel questions. How are we going to deal with them? So we're starting to think about these questions. We don't have perfect answers. In a recent paper, we proposed, how about letting agents have their own corporations? The A Corp, an algorithmic corporation. And if you have a corporation, what you get is something you can draw a line around. You can say there is property that belongs to the corporation. To many, this is troubling. The notion that we will give rights to, if we give agents a corporation, it means that they can sue people. They can get sued, they have rights maybe, and this might be troubling to us because they lack the divine spark, and you might think that only a human can wield rights. So we make no metaphysical claim about what agents actually are, but in terms of convenience and practicality, it will be wise, we think, to let agents be defined around corporations, around property ownership, and then when they misbehave, we can take some of their assets and give it to their victims. So this might be one solution. But it's not the only solution. And if you're at all interested, you might want to check out the paper. And I'll stop here for now, hoping to inspire more questions than answers. Thank you.
Dr. Andrea Bizzozero is a professor and dean in the College of Philosophy at Pontificia Università Antonianum. His doctoral degree in philosophy is from the University of Milan. Professor Bizzozero is a productive scholar whose published work brings together philosophical depth, theological sensitivity, and careful attention to the human questions raised by modern culture. His scholarship ranges across Augustine, Jacques Derrida, education, philosophy of technology, and integral ecology. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrea Bizzozero.
Thank you very much to everybody for this invitation. My purpose is to speak about some hypotheses for an anthropology and dialogue with AI. During a study day held in Rome on March 10th, Professor Jonathan Barlow invited us to consider the anthropological models we refer to when evaluating the value, limits, and potential of technical systems, particularly computational ones like AI. His stimulating presentation highlighted the need to consider the issue associated with anthropologies grounded in assertive metaphysics. Such a framework often imposes a deductive perspective that fails to correspond to human reality. Consequently, I perceive the inadequacy of any anthropology based on a structurally dogmatic and assertive metaphysics, which overlook the inherently hermeneutic nature of human beings. Following our initial meeting, we further discussed the need for an anthropological reflection that is not dogmatically closed, but rather capable of facing the question of AI through a lens that is neither oppositional nor competitive. One of the fundamental questions concerns how we frame the inquiry into humanity and AI, from where we speak and what we aim to demonstrate. Currently, comparative or differentiation-based perspectives are the most widespread, as they serve to reassure a certain traditional idea of human. However, this approach risks stalling the discourse in the shallows of calculative thinking. The comparison between human and AI carries a fundamental flaw: the pretension of providing a unequivocal answer regarding human nature. This definition attempts to establish quantitative and qualitative parameters to measure and calibrate how closely AI approximates the human. This hegemonic thought presents two main criticalities: reductionism and hypostatizations. About reductionism, the human is reduced to a pre-formulated definition to enable comparison with computational systems. This requires a homogeneity of indices to verify correspondences and divergences. Such a calculation necessarily neglects everything that cannot be measured or compared. Hypostatization, this approach reveals a specific idea of the human that is absolutized as the essence. It reduced the multiplicity of human experience to a few forms chosen to represent a paradigmatic essence. It is necessary to begin again from the anthropological question by asking again what it means to be human in order to recognize all the inadequacy of those perspectives of the essence that stigmatize some selected elements considered absolute. Obviously, the problem is not simply in the individual characteristic, but rather in the fact that we decide to define the human essence starting from the selection of some characteristics to the terminate of others. Who legitimize the choice of elements? Who justify the selection of supervise the approval process? Such a perspective is responsible for defining the human, cutting it out of a multiplicity of possibilities and determination, leading us to believe that the human is an essence whose boundary can be delineated clearly and precisely. Thus, it neglects to account for the many possibilities of being human, of humanity that exist for beyond the parameters developed in a particular cultural context and elected to absolute evaluative criteria and judicial parameters. We should rather remember one of its most emblematic traits of the human being, namely, the human is the one who becomes, which takes place in a time and space characterized by relationship. A suggestive paradigm can be found in the life of St. Francis of Assisi. When they asked to him to describe the ideal friar minor, he responded by listing several different friars, each remembered for a unique and original quality. The sense of the friar lies in a multiplicity, or rather in the impossibility of a close definition. This intuition serves as an epistemological model. The human must be understood as design, always through into a context, actualizes itself only historically. Human becoming is an emergence from the here and now, rather than the implementation of a normative definition descending from authority. just as the friar described by Francis is not given in a synthetic, abstract, or conceptual formula that has in itself the normative of and homogenized value to say who the true friar is, so the anthropological question, in its attempt to talk about the human also in relation to AI, will have to give value to the essential human becoming. The human is defined by becoming, and manifest is in multiplicity. Therefore, it is impossible to absolutize any single language or category as if it truly described the human essence. The inquiry into who the human is already betrays a predetermined goal, as the act of questioning configures the nature of the answer. A logocentric question inevitably produces a logocentric response, which tended to reduce the multiplicity to the one, replace diversity with homogeneity, translate living human experience into a single tone essence. While this conceptual approach favors calculation, define essence through the addition or subtraction of common elements, it risks stifling the individual subjectivity by presuming to define them a priori. In the study of AI, referencing human essence as a benchmark can be biased, as essence is an artificial construct modeled on previously selected criteria. Following Emmanuel Levinas, we should move beyond essence, refusing to confine human life with hegemonic constraints. On this path, the human is not discovered through a concept, but is given as subjectivity. This subjectivity is defined as the extraordinary everydayness of responsibility for others, a model of human relations that defined from the model of being. This responsibility is not a form of knowledge or a cognitive character. It is the ethical foundation that realizes the human as an expose of the self to the others. Saying, "Here I am, for the sake of the other," is starting point from which we should question AI. The goal is to verify to what extent my responsibility to care for the other is manifested within the technical system. The proposal is to recover the value of the perspective of integral ecology, which offers itself a possibility of a vision pertinent to the intricate plot that is reality, to grasp the value of a meaning in the multiplicity of elements. We need a dynamic suspension of the force of objectification to try to create the space where principles take shape that transcend the logic of comparison and defense, to open up the possibility of a renewed understanding of the human technical. It is a principal place as a regulator and even more as an inspire the theory and the practice, and that point in the responsibility, the specificity of human subjectivity. Taking care, carry with itself and constantly declare that the human is a coexistent, constitutively marked by a certain relationship. Here we found a possibility of alternative to the absolutization of the primacy of the definition of the human essence to organize the discourse in favor or against AI. A risk is not overcoming limit, but rather forget our own infinitive being, infinitely large and infinitely small. The forgetting of our origin in finitude defigures the human, the subject who is responsible and carry for the finitude of the other. Thank you very much.
Well, our next speaker is Dr. Christopher Snyder. He is the William L. Giles Distinguished Professor. He's a professor of history, affiliated faculty member in the Department of English, and director of British Studies at Mississippi State University. Dr. Snyder earned his PhD in medieval history from Emory University. Dr. Snyder served as the first dean of the Shackles Honors College at Mississippi State University. He has authored numerous books and scholarly articles in the fields of archaeology, history, literary criticism, ethics, and medieval studies. His most recent book is The Making of Middle-earth, The Worlds of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. It was published in 2024. Dr. Snyder's recent publications include a reflection on the history of honors education in the United States, and this has given him time to reflect on the nature of the university itself, and especially in light of AI. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Christopher Snyder.
Thank you, Jonathan, for inviting me, and thank you to this morning's speakers for such wonderful talks and giving us a lot to think about. Can you hear me okay? Is that about right? I'm a medievalist, and I'm not going to say much about the Middle Ages, actually. I'm going to talk about this guy here, John Henry Newman. According to recent surveys and studies, only about 30% of colleges and universities in the United States require any ethics course for undergraduates. Similarly, less than 1/3 of the top institutions require a history course. Now, I could be mistaken, but it seems to me ethics and labor history have a lot to contribute to our discussions of artificial intelligence. Labor historians and ethicists can share important insights about what it means to rush to embrace technology that can radically change the economy, the environment, and even the definition of what is human and what is machine. Should not higher education provide leadership in collaboration between AI development and the perspective of the humanities? Well, in Antiqua et Nova, it calls for, quote, the responsible use of reason and technical abilities in the stewardship of the created world, and encourages the advancement of science, technology, the arts, and the humanities, end quote. So on this, I think the educator saints Francis of Assisi and John Henry Newman of Oxford, I guess, would both agree. So again, I'm going to talk mostly about Newman today, but I hope you can see the connections between the struggles that we're having in higher education, between our critics, our mission, and our expectations of stakeholders, parents and students and others. So here's St. John Henry Newman, now doctor of the Roman Catholic Church, who wrote and revised his magisterial work, The Idea of the University, and related writings on higher education over a long period of time spanning most of the second half of the 19th century. From Dublin, Ireland, from Birmingham, England, he recalled in these works his own education at the University of Oxford and his nearly 25-year teaching career there. Newman saw, when he was a student at Trinity College, Oxford, that's a picture of the front quad at Trinity College. He was not a great student, by the way. So there's hope for a lot of us who were not great undergraduate students always. As a student at Trinity, he saw the utilitarian critiques of Oxbridge of Oxford's liberal education that were emanating from the Scottish universities, from Glasgow and Edinburgh primarily, while as a fellow of Oriel College, he noted the rise of the German Research University, which by his death in 1890 had become the educational model for Britain's red brick universities, as well as for America's new land-grant universities, where you find yourself this morning. He saw these momentous developments in global higher education as a scholar, as a priest, as a university administrator, and perhaps most importantly, as an educator of undergraduate students. We were wise to seek his guidance on any issue of the day, including artificial intelligence, that could fundamentally change the way we educate students and generate new knowledge in the university. The idea of the university. It's one of those books that almost everyone has heard of and almost no one has read, at least cover to cover. It's Victorian prose style and rhetoric often bury, to my eyes at least, priceless gems of timeless wisdom within mountains of overlong sentences and frequent asides that are often time and culture bound. It is eminently quotable and impossible to excerpt. In other words, it's very difficult to teach, actually, to undergraduate students. Now, this is partly due to Newman's admiration for scholasticism, also to the way that the fellows argued in the senior room at Oriel College, which was said to have stank of logic. I don't know what that means exactly, but also I think to his continuing efforts as a poet and novelist in a mixed mode of classicism and romanticism. Nevertheless, what emerges from the idea and another book called The Rise and Progress of Universities, another collection of his Dublin writings, is a definition of both the university and the college, of both the professor and the tutor, and their roles in the pursuit of truth. In 1854, Newman wrote, if I were asked to describe as briefly and popularly as I could what a university was, I should draw my answer from its ancient designation as a studium generale, or school of universal learning. It is a school of knowledge of every kind, consisting of teachers and learners from every quarter. A university seems to be, in its essence, a place for the communication and circulation of thought by means of personal intercourse. So I've highlighted all the times that I'm going to say personal and human in this talk. I want us to focus on those words. I think Newman would have too. So not just all this stuff, but through personal intercourse. Newman, to be sure, a scholar but no empiricist, argued against the compartmentalization of education and for meaning, even if the modern university must needs have a growing multiplicity of disciplines. These various partial views or abstractions, which we call the sciences, wrote Newman, may differ from each other in subject or method, may even overlap, but unless we grasp the relationship of each science to the other and to their contribution to the understanding of the whole, we have not achieved true philosophical knowledge, enlargement of mind, or illumination, end quote. For Newman, then, the university is a seat of universal learning, but also devoted to help scholars seek meaning. It is epistemic, constantly reminding us to ask questions about how we know, what we are going to do with this knowledge, and what will be the impact on ourselves and on our society. This I conceive to be the advantage of a seat of universal learning, Newman writes in The Idea. An assemblage of learned men, zealous of their own sciences, and rivals of each other, are brought by familiar intercourse and for the sake of intellectual peace to adjust together the claims and relations of their own respective subjects of investigation. They learn to respect, to consult, to aid each other. Thus is created a pure and clear atmosphere of thought, which the student also breathes, though in his own case he only pursues a few sciences out of the multitude. He profits from an intellectual tradition independent of particular teachers, which guides him. So universities exist, Newman is asserting, for the purpose of teaching universal knowledge, and the purpose of learning that knowledge is the pursuit of truth. Universities provide to students a preliminary function to scholarly inquiry, a, quote, first step in intellectual training to impress on a student's mind the idea of science, of method, order, principle, and system, end quote. As the authors of Antiqua Nova point out, Newman argued that an essential part of education is forming the intellect to reason well in all matters, to reach out towards truth, and to grasp it, while helping the language of the head to grow harmoniously with the language of the heart and the language of the hands. And that last bit, I think, refers both to service learning, but also reminds us at land-grant institutions about our mission, the learning the language of the hands. The danger, they point out in this wonderful note, is that instead of fostering a cultivated intellect, which brings with it a power and a grace to every work and occupation that it undertakes, the extensive use of AI in education could lead to the students' increased reliance on technology, eroding their ability to perform some skills independently and worsening their dependence on screens. And this is all in Antiqua Nova. The education described by Newman in the idea is called liberal because a, quote, habit of mind is formed which lasts throughout life, of which the attributes are freedom, equitableness, calmness, moderation, and wisdom, or what I ventured to call a philosophical habit. Newman coined that phrase, not me, philosophical habit. That's something, a phrase we should live with and debate about what exactly that means. Habits of mind and philosophical dispositions are not products to be assessed. They are traits of a human being, discovered and encouraged through loving discourse between teacher and pupil. Newman saw his own students not as empty brains needing to be filled with content, but rather as whole, multidimensional human beings whose moral, spiritual, and physical needs required attending to, in addition to their intellectual needs. As he writes, to open the mind, to correct it, to refine it, to enable it to know and to digest, master, rule, and use its own knowledge, to give it power over its own faculties. In Rise and Progress of the Universities, Newman also draws a clear distinction between the college and the university. And I'm not sure how that distinction is perceived in Italy. In America, we toss those terms around synonymously all the time. And we don't really question what do we mean by a college, what do we mean by a university. Well, they had a very specific meaning at Oxford, in which Newman adopted and writes about. And he says, the university is for the professor and the college for the tutor. The university is for philosophical discourse, for theology, law, and medicine, the higher faculties, for natural history, for physical science. The college is for the formation of character, intellectual and moral, for the cultivation of the mind, for the improvement of the individual, for the study of literature, for the classics, and those rudimental sciences which strengthen and sharpen the intellect. Describing a liberal education for us, right? Describing the old trivium and quadrivium of the medieval university. I admire the professor, Newman says. I venerate the college. The professorial system fulfills the strict idea of a university and is sufficient for its being, but it is not sufficient for its well-being, Colleges constitute the integrity of a university, end quote. So it's important to point out that by colleges, Newman does not mean those defined by academic disciplines, which is often what you find in the United States in our large universities. No, the collegium is a community, and I think we heard that message in the earlier talks, a community. Let's not forget that. That's not a collection. A community is something different. Community, it's diverse in its intellectual pursuits, but nevertheless pursuing truth together in, for Newman at least, a residential community of scholars. Newman breathed life into nearly every subject that he taught, and he taught not just the classics. He taught mathematics. He taught patristics. It was the old Oxford curriculum. It was not very specialized, and you had to do it all. And this, according to the testimony of many of his former pupils, he challenged each student to think for himself, to understand what he was reading, and to articulate his ideas, as Paul Shrimpton, the Newman scholar, points out, to compare and contrast, to challenge and contradict, to reduce an argument to its simplest form, to test it against historical examples, to recast it in his own words or in a different style, and to make comparisons with the present day. And a lot of what Newman is doing there is really what the medieval university did and was designed to do, where we get the disputatio, the disputation, disputation, and the idea of devil's advocacy, arguing in any side of a case, which law schools, of course, are very familiar with. Establishing an intellectual culture, in other words, or cultivating the intellect, teaching students not what to think, but how to think, and doing so in community. Have we fully accomplished this in American higher education? Our many critics say no, we have not. So what would it mean, if they're right, that we divert our attention and resources to teaching computers to think at the expense of developing human minds to think, to helping students articulate their ideas? Newman believed in the power and efficacy of the collegiate tutorial model with its stress on the formative value of personal influence, appreciation of the personal element in the process of understanding and embracing knowledge and faith. Newman's brand of humanism was not a belief that literature would make one virtuous, nor that philosophy would create a better world. Imaginative literature and systematic philosophy, rather, make the student receptive to virtue, more prepared to, quote, swim in the troubled waters of a fallen world. Now, to turn to Newman as administrator. So he's been asked by the Pope to go to Dublin to found this Catholic university, now sort of what we call University College Dublin. As rector of this university, Newman told its first students that there was a type of education over and above professional training, one necessary regardless of profession for one to be a, quote, man of character. This, he defined, as one who is clear-headed, intelligent, articulate, yet modest and willing to learn, flexible and well-mannered. The man of character can accept criticism, is balanced in his views and attitudes, respectful of others' opinions, and willing to adjust his own. Without such an education, the student will age, but he will still be a boy rather than a man. A creature who bores others and who is bored himself if he doesn't get constant amusement from others. A man of character is rather a master of himself, Newman writes, has put aside childish things and strives for manliness of mind. And the Latin folks around here will know that this is what virtue literally means, right? And for the Romans, it was the qualities of being a man. But another way of saying it would be intellectual virtue. Intellectually virtuous is manliness of mind. We hear not only echoes here then of Plato and Aristotle and Newman's approach to character development, but also similarities to the new German Humboldtian ideal of Bildung. So the 19th century German Research University gave us a lot of things, including wonderful scientific approaches to history, as well as to the natural sciences, but it also gave us this idea of character development, the Bildung, and also it gave us the concept of academic freedom. Those we should all hold dear. A university with outstanding research faculty was a good thing to Newman. It's what he was building in Dublin. He was building a research university. But it was not a sufficient thing. He insisted on a residential college for building intellectual community. A university, quote, seated and living in colleges would be a perfect institution, he writes. Without a true collegiate environment, argued Newman, a university becomes, quote, a set of examiners with no opinions they dare profess and with no common principles, who are teaching or questioning a set of youths who do not know them and do not know each other across a large number of subjects. An academical system without the personal influence of teachers upon pupils becomes an Arctic winter, icebound, petrified. Can computers save us from such an Arctic hell rather than contribute to it? In 1879, Newman wrote that when I was a tutor in my college at Oxford, I maintained even fiercely that my employment was distinctly pastoral. And John Henry Newman was a priest in the Anglican Church before the Oxford movement, and they asked him to leave Oxford, and he went all the way to Rome and converted to Catholicism and became a Catholic priest. So teaching is a vocation to Newman. From the beginning, he made this choice, not a parish, but to stay in the university and to live out his vocation as a teacher. So maintaining that it's distinctly pastoral profession. He says, I considered that by the statutes of Oxford University, a tutor's profession was of a religious nature. I considered a college tutor to have the care of souls. Now, I have colleagues at this university that may deny the very existence of souls. But I also have colleagues who on a daily basis display care for undergraduates as individuals, as full human beings, and do so as educators of undergraduates, sometimes through much sacrifice, personal sacrifice. And many of these colleagues, and you can imagine some of the disciplines, right, are nervous. Can we blame them when generative AI, for example, threatens to do the work of rational thinking that they are trying to inculcate through their tutelage? The tutorial system, as it exists at Oxford today, was essentially formed by John Henry Newman and his imitators in the 1820s and 1830s. Tutorials are the essence of Oxford's collegiate teaching, partner to the professorial lecturing, which is the purview of the university faculties rather than the colleges. And in large part, this structure, again, is due to the success Newman had as a teacher, as a pioneering, revolutionary teacher. In 2025, Oxford University opened something called the Schwarzman Center for the Humanities. It was made possible by the largest single gift ever given to Oxford in its 900 years as a university. The largest single gift ever given went to create a center for the humanities. Now, it's just opened. I saw it under construction. I'm anxious to see it again. It opened in the fall, and it now houses many of Oxford's humanities departments and many of their humanities library collections. It also houses a 500-seat concert hall, a cinema, a black box performance lab, and a recital hall, and it's all built using crafts workers from the community and built sustainably. That in itself is laudable. But it is also the home of Oxford's Institute for Ethics and AI, where the independent, informed perspectives of philosophers and other humanities experts are shared with technical developers and users of AI in the academy, in the business world, and in government. Oxford's long recognized strength in philosophical and theological ethics, as well as in mathematics and computer science, is what drew Mr. Schwarzman's philanthropy to Newman's alma mater, which he literally called my own dear home. But this Schwarzman Center is also a gamble. Will Oxford's AI research be a healthy product of such humanist and technical pairing? Will this investment bring about a common good or just a material good to an already wealthy university? Will AI respect the tutor-pupil bond, preserve and protect books and scientific quests whose utility cannot always be commodified? Or will the whole center be just another revenue stream benefiting the few rather than the many? I can tell you that many Oxford humanists are skeptical, but then again, skepticism is their default mode. But not so Newman, ever the hopeful critic, extolling the virtues of the past while looking to bring more sun and more sense to our tomorrows. So I will leave you with his little poetic prayer for a home that did not always treat him so well, yet he still loved its every cobbled path and stone tower, onto which bright flowers, like the saint himself, lovingly clung. Newman's ecology here. And he writes, I am rooted in the wall of buttressed tower or ancient hall, else unprized. I have my worth on the spot that gives me birth. But be it mine the barren stone to deck with green life, but not its own. So to soften into grace of human works the rugged face. Mine the unseen to display in the crowded public way where life's busy arts combine to shut out the hand divine. Ah, no more a scentless flower. By approving heaven's high power, suddenly my leaves exhale fragrance of the Syrian gale. 'Tis timely comfort given by the answering breath of heaven. May it be, then well might I, the college cloister, live and die. Thank you.
Joe Stradinger is founder and CEO of Edge Theory, a homegrown Mississippi company that uses AI to accelerate and optimize decision-making. Joe graduated in accounting and finance from Mississippi College and spent the early years of his career as a CPA with Arthur Andersen before engaging in a series of innovative and successful startup ventures. His most recent venture, Edge Theory, provides services to private sector and national security customers. It was an early participant in the discussion around the way the internet challenges traditional means of marketing and awareness. In the Mississippi tradition of great storytelling, Joe directs our attention to what he terms narrative intelligence, a human and artificial intelligence-driven process that analyzes large amounts of data to derive meaning, trends, and outcomes. This includes identifying the patterns of myths and disinformation. Joe's intellectual leadership led to the formation of the National Center for Narrative Intelligence. Please join me in welcoming Joe Stradinger.
Thank you. Let's see, there we go. It's great to be here, and thank you, Daniel and Jonathan, for this time to be here and give a talk about what my context. I'm going to do a little bit different. I'm much more into AI, and but I want to talk about, I've titled it AI Influence and the Poverty of Context, which is something that we study quite a bit, and I think is a very important aspect of poverty, back to the overarching theme here today. Real quickly, my background, as I said, I'm a recovering CPA, so I have this interesting background of assets and liabilities, but that's the way I do think about life that way, and I think about narrative that way, and I think about AI that way, but that's my background. And then how I got into a narrative, the space was in the late 90s. I built a company in Dallas, and it dates me, but we were the first company in the world to sell CDs online. So Bezos was only selling books called Amazon, and I copied his business model, and we sold CDs. And so my kids don't know what CDs are. But what we used, what we did, and was very interesting, is we used chat rooms. And people thought chat rooms were the weird place that weird people went, the AOL early chat rooms. But that's how we got our start. And we learned very quickly that this thing called the internet was much more than Jim Barksdale and Netscape. It was actually a place that conversation was going to be had. Again, there was no social media back then. So that's my early start, and that put me on a whole nother season of life around the passion of narratives. I grew up in the Mississippi Delta. All we have is narrative and storytelling. So I just have this passion for narrative. So I'm going to come at this from a context of AI and narrative. So we've already talked about the Antiqua at Nova. I read up on that. I mean, I'd read it before, but I would just say one comment here that these actually are happening. every one of these concerns, right? These warnings are happening right now. So that's just one comment there. You know, putting my Judeo-Christian worldview hat on, which is my belief system, I go back to when I think of AI and I think of the complexities, I like to bring it back to the simple truth that I believe the imago Dei, right? And that is that we all are created in the image of our Maker. And that means we all have dignity. The poor, the wealthy, the powerful, the marginalized. And so I think I try to remind myself this all the time because I forget it, but this is such an important concept when you think of AI and you think of just humanity. So that's the first point, and I think we're all made in the image of God. We're also, I think, because we are made in the image of God, we're all creative people. We're very, very creative in that we bear the image of our Creator, the greatest artist, right? And so we as humans, if we think about AI is a human innovation. And I think we got to remember that. Every innovation from cave paintings to radio, printing press, radio, TV, I'll talk about that in a minute, all of those were human innovations. And all of those bear our image, which is good and bad, right? And so everything we see can have good and bad. And I think that's very important to talk about. And then lastly, as relates to what I do in narrative, I think we're also all, and back to what we do with narrative intelligence is where I study is, innately, we are storytellers. I believe we're part of this incredible story, but we also really love to tell stories, and we're very good at it. And so when you think of narrative, you know, we can tell stories that are bad and that are good. And so I think those are three kind of overarching things. I would say the imago Dei is almost ideally should be in a design imperative when we think of AI, right? But of course, that's just my opinion. That's not the truth. That's not what's happening. So I want to dispel a couple myths, about AI. AI is math. It is not a human soul. It does not have a conscience. It's scary. It's very, very good. It's very good at predicting things. But at the end of the day, it is not the imago Dei. And it is created by humans. And my company, our company, on the technology side of our company, we hire discrete mathematicians. I'm just a recovering CPA. Way beyond me. But we hire discrete math people. And they're very good at doing deep, deep math, which is what AI is. And so we can study patterns. So I think it's very important that if you think about AI is not math, it is math. I think it's also important that when you think of humans, since humans created AI, it bears the image and it has very, very good things and very, very bad things. So I think that's just, again, something we need to think about. I think this is something I did a long, long time ago in a TED Talk in 2014, but on the oldest form of communication technology, right, is narrative. It is storytelling. I would argue chapter 3 of Genesis was a pretty interesting narrative, right? At the end of the day, narrative has been around since the beginning of our existence. And I think this is a human problem. And when I study influence, and that's what I study, influence and narratives and how it influences people around the world, vulnerable populations, it has very much been around since this human condition began, and that goes back to, people use cave paintings to influence each other. Back then, it wasn't like social media. There's they could, I guess, argue that that's not the same thing I painted, but two people looking at a cave painting, they were influencing people. That was a communication technology. That, of course, jump ahead to 1400s, 1440, you had the written word, right, the printing press. That was a new form of storytelling, a new form of narrative. And then, of course, radio, television, the internet, social media, and then AI. And again, all of these reflect human nature, which can be used for good and used for bad. And I think that what AI has done, that we still we don't understand how big, it's just flooded the world with so much information. And so the world becomes noisier and noisier. And when things become noisier and noisier, it's harder to make decisions, right? And as we'll talk about in a minute ago, your stories get lost in noise. And so when we talk about narrative intelligence, which is what we do, we're an AI native company. We've been doing this stuff for quite some time before there was GPT hit the news. But narrative intelligence is simply the study of how narratives, stories, start, spread, and grow, and how they influence your world. So we help governments. We help those types of customers. We help large supply chain companies. Like, think of a supply chain. The narrative in X part of the world that might be a narrative causing disruption could impact your supply chain. So narratives impact everything in the world, right? Finance, healthcare, you're a pharmaceutical company. You want to care, do I go sell a drug in this part of the world? The local narrative tells you if there's anxiety. So when I say narrative, we study publicly available information, everything publicly available. And how do we use AI to quickly consume that at massive scale and do lots of math to classify it to help people make a better decision? Has anybody ever been here, like been to a Cheesecake Factory menu? Cheesecake Factory, I hate that menu. I mean, it's like, think that's the word I use. I mean, what do you order? It's like 40-page menu, right? It's not Chipotle. And so that's the world we live in, is we live in a busy, busy, busy menu. And when you have a busy menu, it's harder to make decisions. That's just the way the world works. And so what we do all the time is help people make faster, smarter decisions. So I put here, think about, when you think of narrative and think of the poor, the vulnerable, we study who's saying the narrative, who's hearing the narrative, who's spreading the narrative, who's patient zero. Just like a biological virus, there are patient zeros of narratives all over the world. And we study how those impact people. But one of the things that I think is important when you talk about poverty and the context is the scary thing is whoever controls, right, the information controls the influence, controls the narrative, right? And so just to give examples, and we study very, very vulnerable populations across everything from human rights to critical materials to obviously everything in the geopolitical realm. So in the sense of think of the CCP, our U.S. adversary, they love to drive narrative. And they love to drive narrative. And so one example would be, who controls the narrative. Of course, in certain countries, they can, like Iran, they can just shut off the narrative. But in certain countries, obviously not in America where we have this great free speech, we do not control that narrative. But in the sense of China and Taiwan, that is a narrative where we watch and we see how they flood the control of information to push this righteous reunification is their narrative, right? It's not about aggression because they're getting us ready for something they might do in Taiwan. So again, it's very important when we think of poverty too, whoever controls that information controls the narrative. And then the same thing we're deep into, of course, this thing called the Strait of Hormuz right now, which is why, although I have an electric car, my wife does not, you pay $4.50 or $5 for gasoline. But in the Strait of Hormuz, that is, I will tell you, much more of a narrative war than it is a kinetic war. But that narrative war causes gas prices to go up, right? And so in the Strait of Hormuz, of course, Iran has one narrative, we have one narrative. But again, the point is narrative can drive and influence people quite heavily. Some of the bad examples of how AI is used is how large language models, y'all have heard of DeepSeek, right? That if you go in there and you ask about Tiananmen Square, do you think it pops up? It's gone. There is no history. And so when you think about AI, especially in the sense of people that don't have as much access, the marginalized, the more and more information is out there, stories go away. They just go away. Now they just take that story away. But again, as you get more and more noise, and so whoever controls the model, and again, remember, LLMs didn't just appear themselves, they were created by humans, right? They're an innovation by humans. But the good side is, and I was raised on joy, to be positive and happy, there's a lot of good in AI. It's incredible. I mean, just look at, population science, the AI that's helping with disease detection and all that is just very, very powerful. We do a lot around humanitarian kind of early warnings, using AI to understand local narratives around food insecurity, water, et cetera. It's very powerful to find those early indications to go help the poor, the marginalized, way before it becomes a problem, right? We call that early warnings indications. And then, from also close to my heart, ministry. I mean, if you want to go minister or build community, no matter what your faith is, the best, you're selling, right? You're selling your faith. End of the day, a good salesperson knows you never talk about yourself, you talk about them, right? That's how you sell, and that's how you enter a conversation. There is no better way to know what a community is thinking than to go study their narratives, right? And then lastly, the ecological layer. I believe from an ecological sense, and I'm not a big studier of that, but as I think through that, there's an entire narrative layer in that world, right, that should be studied, I believe. So there's a lot of good in AI. But it leads me to this thing as I thought about poverty, and I talk about this all the time. I believe that this sets up what we have as what we call the poverty of context. And I don't think it's just for the poor. I think it's for me and you. We're all becoming more poorer, if you will, in context with AI. Again, I'm talking about the bad side of it. There's good and bad. The more information is very pervasive. And if you look at an arc of data, and your data, right? I mean, you look at what's going on in the data, you think the Cheesecake Factory menu is busy today, it's a billion-fold next year. And as things become more and more synthetic, we call this context rot, reality goes away, and it's a very scary world. And so information and that power of context, so the poor, I believe, are not so much disadvantaged by the lack of information anymore. Clearly, there are people who lack information. They're much more disadvantaged by the people who control the narrative and control the models, right? Because their stories get lost. And I think that's a big, big, big issue with poverty. Who are the poor, why are the poor, what they need. Those are often produced by people who are not poor, right? And that just makes that's a big problem. So again, I would say the big point here is those who are materially poor are the most vulnerable in what I call cognitive warfare, which is narratives, right? In closing, because I want to do more Q&A, but I think that when I think of AI, complexities, narrative, the danger is not AI itself. The danger is in the decisions that we allow AI to make. And I think we got to go back to our responsibility. I don't have an answer because I have a lot of friends that have different worldviews that control a lot of LLMs. We don't believe that LLMs necessarily by any way the long term. We do a lot with small language models. We're very focused on specific sources so that we do get signal over noise. That we're pattern detection people, our company, so we can truly do that. I think that you're about to see a complete flip flop in what people think is AI, but in forgetting those decisions that are ultimately human decisions, I think we got to remember that AI is built by humans. And so a lot of times we blame AI itself. And then lastly, I think everyone talks about jobs and AI can kill jobs, and that's a whole other discussion. But I think the potential danger to the poor is not necessarily they're going to lose their jobs, but it replaces their stories. And I think that's what we're seeing over and over and over. Their stories just aren't there anymore. And I don't mean the deep sea kind of CCP stuff. I mean, you go to models today, I promise you every model is hacked. Every model is being flooded by all of us. The synthetic nature of models is just growing and growing. And your simple little story in your neighborhood goes away. And so I think we're going to see I think there's going to be I believe a revival of actual true conversation, meeting people and shaking hands and having an actual conversation. I think that's what we're going to go to, because what is true anymore? We used to talk about a postmodern world. We live in a post-truth world. And I will tell you, as a studier of U.S. adversaries, our adversaries completely know that the West has become post-truth. And they know they can hurl any narrative into Jackson, Mississippi, into Starkville, Mississippi, any day, which they do through AI bots, and they will divide us every day based on those actions. And so we're all subject to this warfare, but I think there's a lot of positive. The last thing we talk about this, we had this big conference last week on the National Center with a lot of folks from around the country, and one of our head our discrete math guys was talking about a lot of questions around reality, how reality is just going away with AI, and we talk about context rot is the erosion of real world grounding in AI as models rely on increasingly synthetic or biased data. The result is that the already underrepresented populations, often the poor, become less accurately modeled, widening their inequalities. And I think that's something we have to think about. But again, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. I mean, I think there's so much positive stuff in this, but I think we need to humble ourselves and realize we're the problem. It's a human condition that's behind all of this. And how do we change our worldview? And again, that's very hard when you have lots of people building models. But I think the future is, again, really understanding your local. So I was meeting this gentleman Mo earlier, but what is your local conversation? We're going to get back to that, I think, much more in reality. So that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you. So does anyone have a question for a fellow panelist?
If I may. So you introduced us to the you introduced us to the notion of wisdom and human wisdom the divine wisdom. Is there any future when we can imagine machines learning wisdom, or is that something that might be accessible to machines, or is that an innate skill that only humans can have? If that makes sense.
So the answer is I don't have no idea, frankly. In part, I think Andrea made a very interesting point. And when we try to, sometimes our definitions demonstrate more our limitations than they do reality. Or they try to limit what potential might yet be within a certain, either personhood or in something that exists, that around which 5 people can say, we believe this, we understand this to hold some relevance for our lives. And I think that's the other thing about wisdom. Wisdom is not what an individual holds, it's what a community holds. I'm convinced of this, more so maybe because I belong to a fraternity, a community that's international. We don't always act wisely. But I'm always reminded that my own stories, my own interpretation is conditioned in part by others, and by sharing narratives between each other, sharing things that I hold important in my life with my brothers, and then listening to this. I love the example of Newman, the college as a community. And I think and it's not AI, there's a lot of factors. The more we lose the sense of community and the capacity to be able to talk to each other, the less wisdom spaces will be created. And wisdom, I call them wisdom spaces to my mind. Because when we share narratives, we're sharing, I wouldn't say we're sharing wisdom, we're sharing a journey toward wisdom. And I think that maybe in that same sense, is it possible to conceive? I have no idea. The fusion of human DNA with silicon. I have no idea where that. I know it's happening. I know they're talking. But I have no idea where that's going to lead us. Will that create some being? And as much as funny as I say this, I love Stephen Hawking, because he said at some point the Earth community will get tired of one of a species that's creating harm for all the other life forms. That could be by heat, it could be, we'll get a whole bunch of theories about what's going to happen in the future. So I think, I'm going to stop there, but I really think this question of is it possible? I can't rule out the possibility. I can't imagine what it looks like. But I do know that even if it's going to be some type of synthetic future version of wisdom, it's going to have to be community wisdom. That, I believe, is the core to wisdom. Wisdom is never, and I spent a lot of time in villages in Africa listening to stories of people putting their lives together or putting their lives back together, but the narrative was never finished. It was always kind of ongoing. There was always something open, another question to be asked, another perspective to be considered, and those perspectives were not a threat. Those perspectives were understood as helping us become. I don't know if that's helpful. Thank you for your question.
Would anyone else like to answer the question? Feel free to treat it as a question to yourself as well. Okay. Any other questions from the panelists to each other?
I steal the microphone. Just a question. One of I didn't touch upon it really, but one of the concerns with information, and this came up with recently with, I think it's Alpha, and the Claude, and a government wanting to have the code access. So the two concerns that were expressed by the founder of that organization: one, weaponization. We could actually have machines, no longer even the human middle person in between, which, this question of the moral agent. And the other thing is control, which you also brought up, I think, very, very clearly. This notion that government begins increasingly to control the narrative and then to distort the narrative according to its needs. So I just like to say, if you could say just something else. You leaned into a little bit with Iran. We could have put the U.S. up there too, I believe, on narratives, because we know that we go back to the Kuwait War, we go back to other moments in history when the question of truth really. Okay, so thank you.
Yeah, one thing I would say about the wisdom, I was trying to look at this T.S. Eliot quote, which I just love. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? And I think that's such a, that's what yeah, I think, clearly, you go back to.
Seems you're reflecting on a T.S. Eliot quote.
Well spotted. Well spotted, AI.
Somehow AI
Scary.
has found itself joining the conversation.
But I think, today that's, clearly I can tell you, because that's what I study, that this synthetic weaponization of narrative happens every day on every one of our feeds. And I've studied every election security since 2020. It really does happen. And I only study foreign adversaries. I don't study anything domestically. But I promise you that's happening already. It's funny when you get the New York Times or both right and left are all acting like this is a new thing. This has been going on for quite some time. And if you look at history, we won the Cold War because we won the narrative war. Right? I used to live in Budapest right after the fall of '89. That's where I worked. We won that war on telling a better story. And the reality is we do have a better story, right? We have a great experiment here. And so, but, we had things like Voice of America, if you knew what that, they're not here anymore, in the State Department, the Global Exchange Center, Global Engagement Center. But I think, so it depends. And then again, we live in a world that's gone from postmodern to post-truth. So, what is truth, right? I know what truth is, but but no, it happens every day. We track. Influencing people, companies influence us every day, right? On every platform. So I think influence has been around forever, but it happens. And yes, no, there are massive bot farms. That's an old school term, of bots that are influence. I'll give you an example. Anybody here from Jackson, Mississippi? We have this crazy, horrible narrative of, which is true, which is we have bad water in Jackson, Mississippi, right? We have it's the capital of Mississippi, and we don't have very good running water in the actual Jackson. When I was in Washington with people sharing them the example of what I call cognitive warfare, right? Using narratives to influence people. I can show you geospatially, we call them intercontinental ballistic narratives, but I show narratives going from, wherever, Tehran, whatever, and landing in Jackson, Mississippi. During the Jackson, Mississippi water crisis, I promise you no one from Tehran had been to Jackson, Mississippi, right? But they're throwing in narratives on Facebook, right? Fake personas, influence personas, to influence people, not to decide who wins elections, but to bring in this case of the water crisis, it's either systemic racism or it's poor leadership. And they do wedge issues every day. This happens every day. So that's just a little podunk Jackson, Mississippi, where narrative warfare is abound. And so that happens in Starkville, that happens in Rome, that happens in Indianapolis, every day. So we're way beyond is it happening. And now what do we do about it? I think, we have to study, we have to really, I think the idea of if anyone searches Google or searches an LLM, you understand you're getting what it wants you to see. You're getting what it thinks you want to see, right? That's the business model of search. It's an incredible business model. Google's a $3 trillion company because we search, right? But just know that is not giving you exactly the whole story. It's giving you what it thinks you need to see. So I believe we're going to go, this is crazy, but I believe we're going to completely get away from search altogether. And we're only going to be very, very, as people, we're only going to go after the sources that we do know to be true, right? And that's how we're going to look at information. The internet is I think, at a loss in that. Is that helpful?
Thank you.
Well,
Any other questions from the panelists to each other? Okay, well, let's open up to the floor then. And if you think of anything, please feel free to mix it up. We want you to mix it up if you need to. It'd be great. So, yes.
Hi. So first off, thank you all for coming. This was really enlightening. I enjoyed the talk quite a bit. So I wanted to talk some more about local data centers in the United States. So I'm a health economist. I mainly study the effect of human policy and local culture, local impacts on they generate a lot of tax revenue from property taxes and local schools, but they also require a significant amount of tax breaks in order to locate the community. But the amount of information coming out about their impact on human health and well-being is dramatic. Like, for example, they release a lot of PM 2.5. It's a particulate matter that has adverse effects on all kinds of human health conditions like asthma, bronchitis, things like that. And noise pollution literature has been around for a long time. It's pretty significant effects. And not to mention, you know, just the general water intensiveness of them and heat that's produced by them. But one of the things I'm concerned about is in these communities, you know, we're locating a lot of these data centers in some of our most marginalized communities as this sort of boon for economic development. And I think they have the capacity to do that in certain cases. But I am worried about, you know, this future additional inequality that we've been leading to, because in the United States we have massive health inequality by the poor and the rich, which is true in most parts of the world as well. But in the United States, we're starting to see this sort of institutionalized, you know, movement to putting these places in places where they already struggle with material and health deprivation. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on this, because it's a massive needed input of AI, but at the same time, it does have these real physical effects on us.
Who would like to take that?
Maybe I'll share a thought, a comforting thought, because these are alarming facts that we learn and we see developing in the world. There are two comforting thoughts we can hold on to if you want to have some shred of optimism. The first is that if you take it to the logical conclusion that data centers will find themselves where real estate is the cheapest, where social consequences are the minimal, well, space is the final frontier of the location of these data centers. And as you might have read, there are actual semi-concrete plans on locating them there. So maybe it's like a transition period. But the second one is I worry about a world dominated by AI for many sort of systemic existential reasons. But I think the way there is going to be less turbulent than we might imagine, because with the particulate matter emissions and maybe some of the heat and to a lesser extent the water consequences, AI will have tremendous influences on health. And that might be offsetting, maybe not directly, but the net effect is we have longevity drugs, if we have the new generation of GLP-1 medicine that can solve the obesity crisis. All of these are AlphaFold, for example, of an AI that creates breakthroughs in drug discovery, offsetting not on the climate, but net health effects. So we should worry in isolation about like specific effects. We should try to minimize them if possible. In the aggregate, we should consider the offsetting positive effects of AI, but in the aggregate, we should also worry about systems that are smarter than us in our ability to effectively control them.
If I could take three words from Pope Leo, if I can use him. He was Bob when I was studying with him in Chicago. He talked about responsibility, he talked about collaboration, he talked about education. Those are all words for agency. And I think, so I had to do a little background reading to figure out where Starkville was. I knew the Gulf of Mississippi, but I'd never been to this part of Mississippi. But in reading, just in looking at the data centers that are emerging and many more being planned, and some of these different concerns that are coming up, I noticed a few news articles of people already saying this is not the way they're being run, where they're being placed. Who's making these decisions for us, and who's not taking into consideration these consequences of the residuals of these centers. So I think the one, and this is also optimism, I think, with the increasing influence and impact of technology in whatever form it is, there seems to be, at least at the local level, there seems to be still this resilience. And I think this is really important. Perhaps that's something the university, we should be responsible for, helping to build resilience, helping to instill students with the skills necessary to identify where is my responsibility, where do I need to cooperate, and where then can I really try to make a difference to make sure that while it's true the centers can have the benefits, we need to make sure that why not put one of these centers in the middle of one of the wealthiest neighborhoods, if all things being equal? Maybe they should be there. It's the same thing with the petrochemicals in Louisiana, by the way. So these are questions I think that agency, education, responsibility, cooperation, these are some of the things I think that maybe would be helpful.
Any other responses to the question?
I would just say that I've never seen a steel mill or anything in the history of the world ever put in a fancy neighborhood, right? Every innovation that's ever been created has been put in typically those cheaper places where it's cheaper. I mean, I don't really have an opinion. I do think there's a lot out still. You're in a narrative war, I will tell you, because I have customers that do care about this dearly in the commercial space. It is a huge narrative war with two sides to it. And I think I don't know the answer to it. I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of benefits you can see with this great thing called the river. I think with water, there's a lot of confusion with water. Is it really 5 whatever gallons a day, or is it really being recycled? That's a big difference. So I think there's a lot in the narrative that's really confusing people. But I think the more, from your point of view, the more there can be clarity in that narrative. But it is a tremendous narrative war right now. I'll tell you that.
Other questions from the audience?
One for Chris. So, Newton, of course, coming from Italy, I fully buy his distinction in ecology and diversity. But right now, there is all debate about what is the new values proposition for the university with the AI in the middle of this. So, how do you see this play out? Because there are people who want AI to be part of a teaching, research, conversations, and see this as the future for the university. And there are those that say absolutely not. And so how do you see this fit? What is our new values propositions, given that AI is not going to in this framework that you just presented today?
Thank you.
I don't know if you have something else.
No, thank you for the question. So I think this gets at liberal education and scientific pursuits. And a lot of people think of Newman, they think of a defender of liberal education. But I was trying to show you that he was arguing this in the context of a research university and saying, yes, a research university needs to develop the multiplicity of disciplines and needs to have this freedom that I think he respected the German universities, at least pre-World War I, had that academic freedom that protected the pursuits of knowledge in the disciplines without interference from politics or the marketplace, right? To see where the science takes us. That is so important to the mission of the research university. While you have this undergraduate education that's character forming, that is inquisitive, that is doing all the things that he thought it should do, how do you have those two things living together? And so I think that's where AI is, we're in the crux here, that those of us who teach undergraduate students, very basic, low-level courses, we're feeling it maybe the most because the work the students generate is simply not their own work. Without any formal ethical background, how does a 17, 18-year-old make a decision about whether to turn in something that is just easily generated that can get them a good grade versus something that's hard work that may not get them a good grade, right? That we just assume a kind of ethical stance that the student is going to take. But unless higher education addresses that in America through its general education, we're not going to fix any of that, right? So we're pursuing at light speed scientific research in artificial intelligence, great, with the protections, the regulation and the protections that were afforded at a university, but we're ignoring the other part of that, and that is why are we using it? When are we using it? Who are we using it to benefit? Is it benefiting urban populations more than rural populations? These are kind of philosophical questions that Newman was saying we need to develop this philosophical habit of the mind. So it's not counter to what we do in a research university. These things need to coexist together. We get a lot of criticism about not educating students, but indoctrinating students. And I don't think that is the case. But we're not doing a very good job of asking the epistemic questions in undergraduate education, of having the conversations about what is a community versus what is an individual scholar. We have lots of ways to incentivize the individual scholar, but less so a scholar who chooses to be a teacher in a community to help form that ethical actor within this new environment.
Any other thoughts?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you for your relation, because it was very interesting speaking about the Newman. Maybe I can be quite anachronistic in what I will say, but for me it's very important to ask what's the meaning of the university, why we have the university. Why we decide to improve the university. And I think in the university there are always two questions to put in front of us. Then the question about the competence, then the knowledge, in order to prepare ourselves, or to prepare the student to the world of job, but it's not enough, because if you want to make this world a place where we can live, it's necessary to remember that university is also the educative place. Then the great chance that we have maybe now in this age characterized by the implementation of artificial intelligence is try to find a new way to put in dialogue and to discover again the importance of technology like a way to become human. Then we have to think, to travel, to work together, to think a university where the competence and the educations can be come together to discover a new way for today. Then maybe we have to rediscover the interdisciplinary way, not also like Newman, maybe also like Kant, with in that test very, very important, the conflict of faculty, where he say the importance of philosophy, not like, we can say, not like a hegemonic knowledge, but like a way to put in dialogue everything, to remember that our task is education, to grow up a humanity can be take care of this common house.
I would say one thing that we do as a company, we have a thing called the Edge Theory Lab, and it spans across the country, 25 states, but across the globe. We have over 300 students that come to us from high school, homeschooled to PhDs, and they come to us because they care about narrative, right? And what I hear from them, and I love around young people, and again, I don't come from an academic background, but we see that, you know, if you think about the internet, that democratized content, right? That's what the internet did. And then you think about social media amplified that, but then you think about how AI has democratized knowledge to some extent, right? I mean, you can go look up, I mean, the other day I was trying to fix my daggum lawnmower, and I took a picture of it, and it told me what to do. Move this little wire, and lo and behold, the thing started. It's crazy, right? So that knowledge I couldn't have gotten somewhere else. So if you think about the internet democratizing content and the AI democratizing knowledge, I don't think anything except the university and us mentoring youth can do wisdom, right? Wisdom is everything. And I see young people wanting wisdom. They do not want knowledge, right? They do not want information. They want to make sense of this world that I got out of college and the fax was a cool machine, right? They have no concept except been just inundated with information, and they don't want to learn about more information. They want to make sense of that or make meaning of that. So I think, not being an academic, I think something around helping them get wisdom would be everything. And that's what they want.
Questions?
Yeah, could you guys comment on what sorts of rules or regulations or guardrails you might want to see on AI? And I make this comment in the context of the fact that, we're coming off of social media as a big new kind of technological advancement, and we're seeing that the lack of sort of, intentional policy has been harmful to our youth. And we're seeing that there's an increasing desire, and internationally this might be very different, so I'd love to hear from maybe some of our guests about, we let that go. We outsourced it to the corporations in a way, and we might be bearing the brunt of that problem now. And so I'm wondering if can we not use our wisdom to understand maybe the mistakes in the past to encourage what would we do in the future around AI that we see that there might be some consistency or parallels with what we did not do with social media. Does that make sense? Are there any guardrails you'd like to see with AI?
Thank you very much. Oh, okay.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
Thank you for your question. Then I can say two kind of the answer or two kind of perspective about the regulation. Then the regulation to write and to limitate or to propose the development of artificial intelligence. For example, in Europe and in Italy, we have a quite strict perspective because our law is very now is very attentive to avoid the develop without regulation, and for this is. But in the same times we have to reflect about this question, because it's not enough, of course, put the rule or the law to regulate. For us, it's important. Try to think what we want to do with AI. Then in this kind, we have to ask maybe why we want to look for a great development of AI, because human nature can be developed everything in the until the infinite measure, but in the same time we forget to ask to ourselves why until we want to do that, because sometimes I think we consider we have to consider the technology like an aim of our life. It's not true that the technology is just a tool. Of course, it's a tool in the time that I use like a tool, but it's not a tool, because in the technology I find an opportunity to discover myself or to reflect myself, because no one of us can accept to use the old smartphone, but everybody look for the new one. But not just for the technology, but because the human nature is looking for a infinitive, a perspective that is infinitive. Then we have a technology development, but in the same time is a human research of a potential. It's a research of ourselves. Then the law it's very important, but in the same times
we have to help. It's a utopia, I know. It's a dream, I know. But it's important to can dream again that a human can be human.
Dr. Arbel, do you have some?
Yes, I think this is a wonderful question because we remember cigarettes coming to the fore and doctors recommending over newspapers saying, you know, smoke 2 a day, it'll be good for you. We look back and we say, well, that wasn't maybe as so wise. And you look at newspapers from the turn of the 20th century and you see advertisements for fat babies and you see eat butter, like give your babies more butter and saturated fats, and we look back and we think how silly we were. We are in the same period, but we don't know exactly what is the new butter and what are the new cigarettes. Is the future where people use AI to do writing for them? Is that necessarily better? Or maybe it's an elevated future where I can write 20 times more and discover 20 more inventions than I could before. We don't know exactly what the cigarettes of the future are going to be. There is a distinct continental gap between the United States and Europe in the let's regulate first and then figure out against what. And the EU AI Act came into the fore well before we had a solid understanding of AI. And now it has to deal with a lot of questions of implementation. The United States has a very different approach, which is, yeah, we'll figure out, you know, when things break, exactly what got broken. So there are philosophies, philosophical differences, there are epistemological questions about what the future holds, and there is the question of democracy. What is the good future? Is it a future where we retain human as distinct from a machine, or maybe some of us think, no, humans should become hybrid with machines, and that's a better future? And these are hard questions. And we'll see, I guess, the world where you will have domains, where you have a European world where people are more separated than the machines, and maybe an American world, and maybe a Russian world where there is a different vision. All of this will have to play out. There are some areas in which we must have consensus today. Protecting children from exploitation would be, essential problem. AI machines, talking about narratives, are uber persuasive. So if we'll have the newest AI persuading people to buy things that are harmful to them, that could be quite dangerous. AIs are incredibly useful in developing weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons. That is extremely dangerous, and that must be a guardrail around which we all sort of unify and say, this must be a limit. But all the thorny, harder social questions have to be resolved through the democratic process.
I could add one thing. The isolation of AI. This is something which I've just started reading about a little bit more, but I witness it with students and talking with them. AI, in whatever form technology is influencing their lives, where students are, and I don't want to generalize, there are some students, and more than I would have hoped to have discovered, who no longer have the skill to be able to interact. We have more students asking for single room. Is that a phenomenon happening elsewhere? And it's not just that they want because they grew up at home with their private room. I think it's worse than, I think it's more significant than that. And we've all read, I forget the title, it begins with an H in Japanese, where you have these young people who are growing up as young adults who never leave their rooms and they never leave their house, except maybe if there's no one else and no other way to get food delivered. But they literally spend all of their time, and their families end up, because it's treated as a mental health issue now, and we're talking about at least over 1 million people in this age group in Japan, and it could be as high as 4 million. They just don't know yet. But this is, Japan in that particular form seems to be video gaming and things like that more so, but I think it raises some questions and some serious alarm. And these are not types of things you can mandate. And this is where we get back to this, what is the purpose of a university? The purpose of a university is to humanize, to create opportunities, what I call oases of humanity. That's what they should be, oases of dialogue. And through this process, we begin to discover, we begin to put guardrails on ourselves to protect our future.
Questions? Yes, in the back. Hey.
So, one thing that just came up recently that you were discussing was the role that the democratic process is going to have to play here. One concern that I have is with the sense of inevitability that information is going to become so, we're going to have so much information thrown at us, and it's going to be so hard to tell what's true and what's false. I was recently visiting my dad, and his YouTube algorithm was showing him things, and he was like saying, "Oh, well, isn't this ridiculous?" I'm like, "That's not real. That's AI." And his response wasn't, "Oh, I'm not going to listen to that source." It was, "Oh, well, you can't trust anything. You can't believe anything." And so, obviously, that's going to have some really problematic implications for the democratic process and informing people about what they need to be aware of. A concern that I have is just, for the people who aren't in the university, who can't teach this wisdom to, who are participating in the democratic process, how do we get that information out? Do we broaden our reach? Do we convince people that they should come back to school? Do we put it into K-12? How do we, what are your thoughts there?
I think there's more and more a huge digital divide between, the younger generation and all of us. And I think there's much more. You just see it over and over that most intelligent youth, they just are becoming more nihilist. They just don't really care. And I think that's sad, right? So most people, we go look to the right, to the left, and typically the alt-right, the alt-left always own the conversation because most of us are in the middle and we don't talk and we just consume. And that's the problem with the world. But I think most youth are just giving up. They just really don't care. And, they don't care to vote. They don't care for this. And that's a scary thing. I don't know what the answer there is. But I think that's, I see that more and more. And I saw it this past weekend with family over Easter. It's just they don't care to know what's true or what's not true because they know they can't because they live in a world that's so noisy. So I think that discernment, is critical how we can teach our youth discernment. And I think, again, it's going to go back to, I do think, again, on the positive side, I do think we're going to see a revival of if you have social skills, good social skills, which, in the South, that's one thing that we do have, right? I think that's going to be a big, huge thing, to be able to have an actual conversation, because we've gotten away from actual conversation. People are going in the rooms playing games. And by the way, games are the most incredible place that narratives are pushed, right? Gaming. And so when you think about that, I think being able to encourage people to have more physical conversation, I think we're going to get closely, which I think is a good thing, to a point where there's going to be so much information, because that's not slowing down, that I'm going to have to go to someone's house actually and actually have a conversation. That's a good thing. That's a good thing, and that's where we're going, I think.
I think one of the movements in higher education that we're seeing in the last couple of years are the founding of these civics centers for civics education and civil discourse. And academics are rightfully skeptical about this because it's often being imposed from the outside. But I think we need to remember that most of the 20th century America did have civics education. It was in the K through 12 system. It was a response to World War I and World War II and even the beginning of the Cold War. I think my generation was probably about the first where that started to disappear. And the academy always said, well, we don't need to do this stuff. We do political science. We don't need to do civics. That's done by the schools. But like ethics, it's not being done by the schools. And so there are some basic assumptions about how American government works. It's not a democracy. It's a democratic republic, for example. These just basic things, a knowledge of the Constitution, we cannot take for granted at all. And so we got to go back to the beginning. We got to ask the get them to ask the question, what are my rights as an individual and what are my responsibilities in my community? That's, I think, the fundamental question in politics, right? And they're not, everything is in a consumerist model. It's how much can I consume, right, as an individual. And if I can do it all in my own room, no one's bothering me, all the better. But literature has powerful narratives to tell. We got to keep asking them to read books, read novels. Brave New World, so many of this stuff was in the minds of people in the 1930s, and Huxley did a wonderful job of showing the power of the human imagination to have a greater magic than the technology. When John the Savage was brought from the reservation to London and they said, "Mr. Savage, aren't you impressed with our helicopters that can travel from London to New York in 12 hours or something?" And he said, "No, Ariel can wrap his girdle around the world 5 times in that time period." Like, the imagination comes first. What are humans? Part of what we are imaginative beings. So when we read literature, whether it's classical text, whether it's science fiction, which our students love, we can get them through literature to engage in questions about individuals' rights and responsibilities in a democracy, right? About are we truly living in a post-truth age? If that is what we all agree, we're all doomed, right? You can't trust data anymore, Mimo. If there's no truth at all.
And one of the things that we see a lot is and we prove this out all the time, is it's scary, but people still have this crazy idea that you can debunk the narrative. You cannot debunk a narrative. You can't debunk a narrative. It doesn't. Look at politics, right? And so you have this really weird, I think, and so to me, the ultimate answer, I say this to businesses, and I say this to people and ministries, you have to go pre-bunk the narrative. We live in a world full of narrative for storytelling. If we're not out there being creative, telling our stories, the truthful stories, we're just, it's a really weird world where, you can literally have any story, and once your dad or my dad or whatever, they get hacked. It's like we talk about cybersecurity and cognitive security. Cybersecurity is like you got a bunch of computers and you understand if there's a vulnerability, and if there is, you got to patch that you cannot unpatch a mind. It's much easier to hack a mind, whether I'm a company and I'm doing this in marketing, whether I'm a politician. It is so easy to hack a mind today because there's so much information. And I think we got to teach people, don't be hacked. I don't know how to do that.
If I may, one little bit of optimism again. So there is a question of the motivation to search for the truth, and there is a question of maybe the universities can instill in us, in our students, in the next generation, a sense that the truth matters. It matters for self-governance. It matters for the good life, to be able to know what is true and what is not. There are some people who have abandoned, we know that, the search for truth because they think it is hopeless. A recent study came out and showed that technology has weird interdependence. It turns out that there is a paper called Grok. Is that true? And the paper documents how people on social media will sometimes see evidence presented to them and say, "Grok, is that true?" And then an AI system will tell them whether it's true or not. And the researchers looked whether people change their minds, because some of us believe that, the other side is stuck in their ways and they will never be persuaded. It turns out that people do change their mind when Grok tells them, which they perceive to be a reliable institution, for better or worse, they do change their mind. So it's not all hope is lost. Maybe there is room for universities to tell us.
Yeah, and I think that's what Newman was saying, is that's what we do in research universities. We are experts in these different disciplines, and we fight it out, right? We are vigorous champions of truth through our discipline. We got to protect that, and we've got to recapture the narrative from the critics and say, that isn't changing our minds. That is following the evidence, right? That is intellectual humility to say, I believe this, yes, because the evidence we had at that time led us down this path. And now we have more data. Now we have more evidence. And the scientific community does believe this position. That is not an opinion. These are arguments. Again, a very fundamental thing we do in our honors seminars. Teach them to run away from opinions and run towards arguments. help them to create arguments, construct arguments, which depend upon truth. So we gotta hope they don't think it's a post-truth age, or it's a very difficult project to do.
Any other comments from the faculty? I mean, from the presenters? We don't have really time to do justice to it. Well, we do justice to one more question. How about that?
And I apologize if you guys talked about this earlier. I missed the AI and the university talks. I had to go to a meeting. But my question is, as we move forward with the task of preparing our students across the university for the integration of AI, whether that's in academics or in their workspace, and I'm thinking especially those that don't have a computer science or computer engineering background, what skills or skill sets held by those students should be fostered during that process as we integrate and teach these non-computer science students how to use this technology?
That's great.
The barriers to entry have never been lower. It's easier. You don't need a computer science degree to be a master of AI. What we do need is curiosity, the desire to build, the belief that you can change the world, a sense of agency among us, curiosity, and the search for truth.
Yeah, I 100% agree on curiosity. I mean, I just think that, you know, we thought we would have in our lab more computer science folks, and even the computer science folks that come into our lab become liberal thinking people, right? You know, and they want to solve problems. So I think it's curiosity.
If I can, sorry. Okay. Maybe it's not enough to know the technology, to have a technology knowledge to use a computer, because it's true, it's necessary have a specific knowledge about informatics, AI, but in the same time we have not to forget that it's a human that use that. Maybe we have to rediscover a way to learn with the tools, and try to rewrite our knowledge with the new tools. And I think this is not just a technical way, but it's anthropological way, because human and technical instrument are always together. Then it's not maybe enough try to develop some particular knowledge. Maybe try to discover a new way to learn with and to explain ourselves with.